Okie dokie. What is it today? It is March 9th, 2023. Welcome to Scouching Live. This is the 14th iteration of the show this year, which is great news. It's a good number 14. How are we all doing? I am doing quite well. Good evening. Again, podcast listeners, I'll run through the list of names that I have tracked this week. It's a bit shorter than previous weeks. I was a little bit sick Friday going into the weekend, but all better now, and I've been busy the last few days. So we took a look at Felix Nielsen in Sweden, Denver Barkey, London Knights. He moved down a few spots, down 6 spots. We took a look at Vladimir Mikhailov, who's a kid that was actually a chatter recommended last week, and I liked what I saw, so I took a look at him, and I'll be doing more in the near future. Grayson Sachin, another one who I did a game of, but he stayed the same. Same thing with Cam Allen. He stayed the same. I moved him down a little bit, watching some other guys later in the week, but not doing any data on them. Roman Kantsarov, I circled back on him in Russia and moved him back onto the list. After he had been off it for quite a while. He actually was really, really good in the game I did today or yesterday, and we could talk about him if you like, but he was pretty good. Danil Boot, I did another game of him in the KHL, and he played really well in that game too, but stayed the same on my list. I did a game of Caden Price, and he stayed the same. Same thing with Edward Shala. Did a game of him, and he stayed the same on my list. Oliver Moore, I did another game of him, and he again stayed the same on my list. And then today I did a game of Samuel Hanzek. He moved down a slot, and Dalibor Dvorsky moved down 2 more slots after watching him again. So that's it for this week. So still quite a few guys, but relatively quiet relative to the previous few weeks where it took me 8 years to get through the list. But yeah, some very interesting showings. Definitely was a lot more impressed with Roman Kantsarov than I thought I would. So yeah, good times had by all, and it's always fun. With that being said, thank you very much to the sponsors of the show, McKean's Hockey, for providing the platform for doing what I do. Blue Line Hockey IQ program from Marcus Gustafson. Thank you very much as well. I'm a guest feature in his program there. You can get 10% off with the coupon code Scouching, or you can scan the QR code above my head, or use the affiliate link in the description to use my Fanatics affiliate code to give me a kickback on anything you buy from that wonderful store, which I believe may or may not include something like this, which is a Toronto Maple Leafs reverse retro jersey that I just got in the mail the other day, and it's gorgeous. And of course, I put the greatest healthy scratch of all time to ever play for the Toronto Maple Leafs on the back in number 37, Mr. Timothy Liljegren, member of Team Scouching, and one of my favorite defensemen, young defensemen to play on the Toronto Maple Leafs in a very, very long time. And one of my favorite young defenders in the NHL in general these days. Just a ton of fun to watch, and really wanted to put him on a jersey, but the staff at Real Sports in Toronto wouldn't do it for me, so I had to go through other means. Anyway, we won't talk about that. All right, so let's start from the top for questions. We got a triple header from a John Hanrahan today. Have you been impressed by Jack Quinn's rookie season? So I actually was in Buffalo Monday night with a friend of mine, and we went to the Oilers game there. And number one, Connor McDavid is really good, but that's not controversial. He scored 2 of the 3 goals that Edmonton had that night. The Edmonton Oilers looked pretty good, to be perfectly honest. Like Buffalo, you can definitely see a promising young team there. Not perfect defensively, especially, but they've got a fun offensive team. And the Edmonton Oilers, though, they looked pretty freaking good. And Jack Quinn in that game, I thought he played pretty well. I still have a hard time separating his success from John Jason Peterka. He was great in that game, Peterka. Quinn had a few really good offensive chances, and that's kind of what he does. But I just love how Peterka plays, and he's playing with Dylan Cousins, who also played really well that night. I don't know. I thought Jack Quinn was good. I've felt whenever I've seen him this year, he's been good. Very good analytics for him as well that are there as well. I don't know. He's been good, but I can't say I've seen so much that I can be like definitive about just how good he's been. But he's been pretty good. Next question was, what will Gavin Brinley be at his peak? Well, I'm hoping that you see sort of a top 6, transition guy. Like, I think a lot of people, I think I might, being a guy, again, I'm wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey tonight. I think a lot of people wrongfully pick on Alex Kerfoot, and I feel like you could have a very similar player in Gavin Brinley one day. Just a really high octane, speedy, really skilled guy who might not score 30 goals in a year, but could set up a lot of plays and get himself a lot of chances, and at the very worst, be a really good defensive player first and a really good puck transporter. I could see that out of Brinley, because where his metrics have kind of been a little bit lackluster for me is just once the puck is in the offensive zone and, getting pucks off the boards and into the middle of the ice. Like, he kind of struggles to do that, but man, open ice and getting the puck up the ice and playing defensively, it's really, really good. Who are your best under-the-radar defensemen for the draft? Well, I mean, there's a few. I mean, Dmitry Simashev is the guy that I love the most, that I don't hear a whole lot about. But more and more, you're seeing him in the late first round, and that's cool. I think Tanner Molendyk deserves a bit more attention, especially if you like really mobile and skilled sort of offensive-leaning guys. I like Tom Willander and Jakub Dvorak if you want more defensive-leaning guys. I think Willander especially has a little bit more offensive potential in his game than a guy like Dvorak. I mean, with Dvorak, he's probably, in terms of the numbers that I've tracked, like one of the better defensive defensemen that I've tracked this year, and I think he's got enough skating ability and skill to sort of be a little more assertive offensively, but he just kind of doesn't, which is okay. But like, he's like among the leaders in my data set for defensive blue line interactions, and he's one of the best defensive entry shutdown guys that I've tracked. Just a big, long reach, heavy player, and I think there's a lot of runway to go with his development. The only problem is he's been injured pretty significantly over the course of this season, which to me is an opportunity. As long as you do your homework on his health, it's an opportunity to land him later than you probably should. Who else I would throw in there? I like Arvid Bergstrom as well, and Matthew Mania if you want sort of like high skilled defenders. Those guys also I would say are pretty underrated. I'm trying to think of other ones. Hoyt Stanley in Victoria could be an interesting pickup for a team like in the mid rounds. I like him. Like, he's one of these defensemen who a couple of years ago, like when he was drafted by Everett, he was listed at like 5'7", I think, and like 130 pounds or something. And in the last few years, he's just grown like a weed. And really sort of, you can see echoes of that undersized defenseman there. He's really skilled and like a pretty good skater, but like just packaging it all together and being a really good puck mover is really hit or miss with Hoyt Stanley, and he's very much a volume shooter in the offensive zone, and I'd love to see him, work a little bit more skating work into his offensive zone play and all that stuff, just to be a little more daring, rather than just throwing pucks on net a lot, which is kind of more what he does. I also really like Gennady Chali. I mean, he started really hot with Waterloo. They're a really good team, and I think Gennady Chali has been, he's a guy where the defensive game is really not there, but as a late round pick, he's really skilled. He's got a really good shot from the point. And I think there's a lot of potential for Chali. It's been a long time since I've seen him. He's a guy where the good is really fun and the bad is really terrible, but the fun is still really fun. And you could do a lot worse, I would say, with a late round swing. And he's also very, very young for this year's draft class. There's a few defensemen, I think, this year who nobody really talks about. Albert Vickman is another one I'll throw out there. Just a really good defense-first guy who doesn't have an offensive bone in his body, really, but does a lot of things right. And outside the offensive zone, I think he's a guy where if you pay attention to the details of his game, he plays pretty well. Okay, Game Pass guys. I don't see what everyone likes in Zach Benson. He doesn't look like a top 10 pick to me. Tell me why I'm so very wrong. So I can kind of see where you're coming from. Like, Zach Benson is a guy that I think I've got him in my top 10 personally, but I do have concerns about him, especially when it comes to projecting him as an offensive NHL player. Like, I think Benson has trouble penetrating the inside of the middle of the ice with possession. He's very much sort of sticking to the perimeter a lot. Really relies on just raw intensity in his game, which I think is okay, but I think that, the big thing, like Joel Henderson kind of put it really well for me, is like, how much more are you going to get out of Zach Benson than you're already getting over the next few years, right? Like, is he going to get a whole lot stronger? Ideally. But like, he's really intense on his feet. Are you going to refine his skating to be a little bit more efficient and like build a little bit better speed that actually makes a lot more sense projecting him as a high-end NHL player? I think that's possible, but or is he sort of projecting as just one of these really hard-working NHL guys that, doesn't really score a whole lot of goals, but like is a dangerous perimeter sort of playmaker, which I think is reasonable to assume out of him. Like, I'm looking at the track data I have. He's not bad. Like, there's nothing on here that I would say is bad outside of his shooting tendencies, and a lot of that is from just sticking too much to the perimeter. But in terms of shot assists and like generating chances for his teammates, right now he does it really, really well. So when I see a guy like that, I kind of also go, well, why isn't he penetrating the inside of the middle of the ice? And I think a lot of that is, he's a hardworking kid, but I don't think the skill level to like get through layers of defending is quite there. He's a guy who I don't think really goes to the net off the puck as much as you would like. He kind of likes to sort of circle around the boards. There's a bit more cycle play with Winnipeg, and I don't really see a whole lot of that cutting inside role. And I would like to see a little bit more ability of sort of driving the puck inside the middle of the ice himself. But he's among the leaders in my data set for like causing turnovers in the offensive zone, which I think is very clear for me from watching Zach Benson all year. That checks out. And his transition data, for example, like across like pretty much in every situation, it's all pretty good. But again, I would like to work on refining that skill level, sort of refining his ability to not overskate what he's capable of. Like, he's a guy who I think moves his feet a little bit too quick for his own good, and that can cause sort of fumbled pucks in transition, some sloppy pass receptions here and there, just because he's, I think, just, always in go mode. And that, that's cool to watch. It's fun to watch, but not always translatable to like a super high-end offensive player. But I think, if he ends up going like 14th overall, like, you probably will end up with a really good sort of energy guy in your middle six at the very least. And if things go right with his development and he does sort of settle into a more projectable sort of offensive game where he's cutting into the middle of the ice by himself a lot more, then yeah, I could easily see there being something with Benson. But yeah, I don't know. I've really kind of gone back and forth on Benson all year. Some games I think he looks spectacular. The data always comes out looking good, and then there's some other games where the data looks good, but then I come out going, yeah, but like, is he just the hardest working guy on the ice in the WHL? And like, how far does that take him? I don't know the answer to that question. But when I look at him relative to guys like Mitchkov and Carlson and Moore and Smith, like guys I've watched more recently, I have a hard time putting Benson ahead of those guys when I see what those guys are capable of, and especially with Oliver Moore, who's a guy who is very speedy and has a really high motor, but the skill level and the ability to sort of distribute the puck, and there's just so many things that I think Oliver Moore does extraordinarily well that Benson, I feel like Benson could watch some Oliver Moore tape and learn a lot of how to sort of like settle into the pace of a game a little bit more, rather than just trying to like go out there and outwork everyone, and just whatever happens from that outworkness, I guess you could call it, it's all fine and dandy. Okay, you've lamented quote, what is hockey sense, yet often do a good job describing when guys do good or bad things in terms of processing. Broad term, but why are you hesitant to classify things as hockey sense? That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I think what I would say is like, just think about another area of the game, right? Like shooting. You can say a kid's a good shooter, but like how, right? Like in what way are they a good shooter? Is it that they can, when they have a slap shot from the perimeter, it's like they can score on that kind of shot? Are they good at finding a nose for space around around the net, finding little pockets of space to be a pass reception target, an easy sort of dangerous chance from the inside kind of guy, using his feet to sort of just create little gaps between himself and the defenseman? Like, is that a good shooter? What about guys who can break in on the rush and shoot a wrist shot in full flight like a Lucas Raymond did in his draft year, where you're like, this guy can play in a rush offense situation and rifle it at top speed on the rush. That makes a player a good shooter as well. But it's all these different like subcategories of the same discipline in the sport. So to me, it's like, it's a big reason why when I boil things down to the general categories of how I rate players, a big part of why I do it that way with the number and the letter is because there's so many different things that go into that area of the game that they might be strong in one area and deficient in another, or you see a lot of one part of that subcategory or of that category and then not very much of another part of it, and it just kind of muddies the water a little bit. And it's the same thing with hockey sense, right? Like, there could very easily be a player who has a great mind for, getting the puck out of the defensive end, right? Like, take Grayson Sachin, for example, who's a guy who I think in open ice and, with juggling multiple passing options and baiting defenders one way and looking for a secondary option and using skill to do it, even though he's not the quickest guy in the world, to me that indicates a pretty strong sense of the game in a certain area. But in the offensive zone, I find Sachin kind of like struggles to get inside the middle of the ice a little bit. He can sort of like skate himself into a little bit too much pressure and not really have the skill level or the raw speed to sort of cut through pressure or resilience. And is that good hockey sense? Like, understanding that might be a limitation of his game. That's another sort of sense area that's another area of that category that is a little bit more deficient than some of the other stuff that he does really, really well. So when I see people sort of boil their scouting reports down and say, well, this guy thinks the game really well, my response is always like, well, but how? Like, what is it that they think really strongly in? Like, what, because otherwise you're really boiling it down too much, in my view. So it's very important to, I always come at it with the approach of like, what is the player, what is the impact of the player in the game and where is it, and how, like, because you can have a better impact else in other areas of the game and lesser of an impact in other areas and still be a really, really good player. Look at Connor Bedard. I think Connor Bedard has a tremendous offensive impact on the game, but there's other things that he's deficient in that I think you could put under the umbrella of hockey sense, but in the grand scheme of things, there are other things in that category that make him really, really special. And so it's kind of like this tightrope of saying, well, is his hockey sense good or bad? And I just don't think it's like to me, it's in the same avenue of like, is this player better than this player? It's like, well, in what way do you mean better, right? Like, you might be able to say like, who would I rather have? But like, I would also be curious as to the explanation of why. And so it's just a matter of like oversimplification for me that I have trouble with, because when it comes to hockey sense, especially like just like say shooting or passing, there's like infinite number of different, well, not infinite, but a pretty decent number of different areas where players can be strong and players can be weak. And how you sort of value those strengths and weaknesses is kind of the whole fight, right? Now I'm just thinking about me as a hockey player and like things that I do decently well and the things that I don't do decently well. Like I am a defenseman and I skate pretty well. I play ball hockey a lot. I think of myself as a pretty good passer, pretty much as long as I'm, not under pressure and as long as I'm, moving balls and pucks up the ice, right? Like breakouts and in the offensive zone. Like in the offensive zone, I kind of struggle because my brain automatically goes funnel the puck or ball to the net. And so if there's an option I see, I'll go for it. But like cycling around the boards and reading multiple options, not really my strongest area, but then on the other hand, like covering defensive rushes, that's a problem for me as a defenseman. I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I'm a decent skater, but like just knowing when to pinch and when to sort of time my plays can be tricky, especially against really, really quick opponents. And is, like it's all just sort of like different subcategories and different areas of the game that are all important. But you can be strong and deficient in that all kind of funnel into the same category, if that makes sense. What are the chances that Andrew Crystal is actually taken with a later first round pick? I'm seeing a few more rankings where people are skeptical about his skating. I would love to see the Leafs take him. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's outlandish. Personally, I don't know. I see the issues with Crystal and, like his lack of real quickness and speed, I think really hold him back off the puck. Like Crystal to me is one of these guys where he needs, if he in order to do what he does best, he needs to have the puck. And is he capable of getting the puck back, when he doesn't have it? I don't think it's that strong of an area of the game for him. He's pretty small and not super quick, and usually when that happens, that does take you out of the game quite a bit, and you rely on your teammates quite a bit more. And I think that teams are scared off by that. Personally, I look at it and go, yeah, but when you get him the puck, he's a magician, and if you can work on his skating and get him to be quicker and more explosive. I think explosive is the word I would use. There's not much explosiveness to Crystal when he gets around, how he gets around the ice. Would the Toronto Maple Leafs be able to work on him with that, or work on that with him? Absolutely. I don't see why not. I think any team that does their homework would understand that that's a big area that could really unlock super, super high-end NHL potential. So when I look at Andrew Crystal, though, I can see where people are coming from with the criticism of his game, but there's no universe in the world where I'm looking at him and saying he's not one of the 15 best players in this draft. Like, you just got to take the bet, because I think at worst you're going to end up with a guy who can play, decent second line minutes if you alleviate his defensive role and you put him out on the power play, and you could end up with something really, really impressive. I don't know. I think he's got a heck of a future ahead of him. I think there's a lot to love about his game. He just keeps obliterating the basic metrics that I track, especially once the puck's in the offensive zone. There's just so much to like. That if he's there, like he's on the team Scouching short list. Let me just pull it up here. Like, he's number 1 on the short list for 25th through 32nd overall. And I mean, if he's there, you just have to take him. I mean, knowing Kyle Dubas, he'll trade back and go off the board, because that's what they've been doing recently. But if Crystal's there, like, you kind of just have to take the bet. Like, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But if it works out, you could end up with a tremendously talented offensive player. And yeah, like, I also feel like young players, getting stronger and more explosive and quicker, that's kind of the whole goal of a lot of the training plans that they go through anyway. And I think that a lot of his deficiencies could be alleviated just by doing a bit more of that. Any thoughts on Noah Warren and his D+1? Last season I asked you about him to the Leafs and you weren't very interested, but I like his game from what I've seen. Good reach and mobility for a 6'5" defender. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a bit of Noah Warren this year, but not a tremendous amount. I mean, again, like, I think Noah Warren is a guy that could play NHL minutes. I would not have drafted him 42nd overall. I have when I look at the QMJHL, I just don't fundamentally see it as that strong a developmental league. And yes, when you're defending, points don't really matter, but I don't know. With Noah Warren, like, I really struggle to see anything other than just sort of like a bottom end of your lineup, physical, solid defensive minutes eater. And I find that those guys in the NHL, like, you can eat, like, a lot of guys in the NHL like that are available either in the trade market or whatever. And again, like, it's always, to me, about what are you leaving on the board when you draft a player. And at 42nd overall, I mean, there were a lot of players that I thought brought a lot more potential value, that, like, guys like, say, like a Lane Hudson or in my opinion, even a Kallio Delius, or guys who, the guys like that don't hit the market very often. Even Elias Salamonson is a defender. Like, I felt that Salamonson moved a lot better than Warren. I felt that he shot the puck a lot better than Noah Warren. I felt like he moved the puck a little bit better than Noah Warren, even if it was frustratingly boring, and did it at a level that is higher than the QMJHL. So it's, like, I could see a world where the Anaheim Ducks put Noah Warren on a line with Pavel Mitchkov and just go, let Mitchkov do whatever you want. You are not allowed to do anything offensive, Noah, and you just play defense all night long. And even if you come out with no points in 60 games, that's your job. And, like, sure, fine, you can do that. I could see that being an option. But again, like, it's just a matter of how much you value certain traits in the context of an NHL draft, where you get to pick anyone you want, and you hopefully are turning these guys into guys where it's like, man, we're glad we have this guy and we don't have to sign a guy like him in free agency. And with a guy like Warren, he's still quite unproven, I would argue, and I think there's still a lot of value that they left on the board in the middle of the second round. David, hello. What do you think is Matthew Wood's upside? I don't know. I got him on the list to track him this week. It's been a while since I've seen him, but I mean, it's Matthew Wood is part of this group of guys this year, like Charlie Stramel, and I'm trying to think of another one. Definitely Charlie Stramel. Sam Hanzek is another one. Who else? Just looking at my list. And those guys are good examples. Nate Danielson would be another one. Like guys where if their development goes well, then they could be really good. Like Matthew Wood right now, I don't think is really close to being a good NHLer. Yes, he's scoring a lot of points, but I see a guy who I think his shot is maybe a little overrated. He's a guy who I think is more imposing than like actually really, really, really good. But he is a guy who once in a while really gets his feet moving, can generate some speed. I think he makes plays under pressure really well. The problem is he just like skates full on into that pressure a lot and just doesn't really have the skill level to get through that list. Or get through that defensive those defensive layers with that skill level that he has. It's just not really there. I would love to see him be a little more physical than he is, but I mean, I don't know. What's his upside? I think if you're really optimistic about him, like you might find yourself with a middle six supplementary scorer who can put the puck in the net and use that threat as a shooter to sort of make plays in the offensive zone as well. It's just with Matt Wood, like, let me just pull up his stuff that I've done on him so far. I think I've done 4 games. Oh, I actually haven't. It's been only 3. Like, he's not driving poor data results really from what I've seen, at least once it comes to like shooting the puck in the offensive zone. But like not really creating a whole lot of offense through his passing for his teammates. Not really the most reliable offensive transition guy. Like he's turned the puck over on half of his carry attempts in the going offensively, which is among the worst I think I've tracked this year. Most guys are like 80% or more. And like even 80% to me is like, well, you're turning the puck over 1 every 5 times you try to cross a blue line with control yourself. That at junior levels, like that seems a little murky to me, and he's doing it way worse than that. And I can see how, even on pass receptions, he's turning them over 35% of the time. So just like settling pucks and gaining control, making space for himself and escaping pressure is just a huge problem for him. But he finds space in the offensive zone. Guys get him the puck and he shoots it from mid-range a lot. So how much will that carry him? I don't know. Like if you're drafting him 17th overall, that might be a little bit higher than I would do it, but I kind of understand it. But if he's there like late first, sure. Like you might end up with an auxiliary scorer guy who you can leave in college for a few years and then let him go in the AHL for a while. And I feel like you could end up with something for the middle of your lineup who can play on the power play. But I'm not like over the moon about him. What is the junior league that's most difficult to evaluate and why? I mean, they're all different. Like there's no, I don't know, like I think a lot of it comes down to like experience. Like you just have to spend a few years like learning and seeing how these guys play and the levels like and how they work out. Like over the years, I've learned to trust the way certain players play in certain leagues relative to other ones a lot more, right? Like when I look at the Finnish Junior League, like you mentioned the Russian Junior League, Quebec Junior League, US Junior League, and Finland, for example. Like I've seen time and time again guys in the Finnish Junior League that produce really, really well, and I'm sitting there going, yeah, but I don't see it with them. Like Samu Salminen is one of them. Levi Altonen was one way back, and Nicholas Nordgren were guys way back in that junior league where I was like, these guys are actually pretty good, and then they hit higher levels and they really hit a wall. And you just have to be really careful with certain leagues, right? Like I think the USHL is the USHL is a really good level of hockey, right? Like the US, I think at the junior level is probably on par with Canada, I would think. Like I look at the US national team and the guys that are in the USHL that don't play on the national team, and I definitely see similar, like comparable cohorts of players. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that the CHL is 60 teams and the USHL is 20. Like, you just concentrate so much more talent at the USHL level, and you allow your development team, your national team, to play against college teams who could have guys that are 6 or 7 years older than your top line guys. And that, to me, is a very good developmental system for them to be in, and it really puts you to the test. When I look at, like, the Russian Junior League, like, the best Russian Junior League teams playing against each other is pretty good hockey. It's not great, but it's pretty good. It's just you have to be very careful that you know which of those programs are worth watching, because there's a lot of them, especially now with everything going on in Russia and how they're coping with that. I think there's a lot more crummy teams in the Russian Junior League, because I think rather than like making their league smaller, they'll just give multiple teams to the same organizations and just have more kids playing against each other, which to me dilutes their talent pool even more than it already is. And it is very diluted. Like, some of those teams are not good. And it's just very tricky. So you have to make sure you pick and choose the competition level, in my opinion, there. And, you know, and you also mentioned like Quebec, and Quebec, I think, just has fallen behind the rest of Canada. Like, I don't know. Every single time I watch guys that score a lot and drive a lot of really good results in the queue, I go back and watch the WHL or the OHL or the USHL, and I just go, I feel like it's just not the same level. And in the Substack post I made in December about projectability, like, I noted, and there's data out there where the Quebec League is producing fewer and fewer NHL players that are younger over the last 10 years than other junior leagues, especially the WHL. So, and that, you know, that's hard to deny, and that's like including guys that are in the NHL playing good minutes, playing games, and like, you know, they're under, I think 25 was the benchmark I set. So you just have to kind of be familiar. And, like, I don't know, I've watched maybe 2,000 individual player performances since the 1920 season, when I really started tracking guys closely. And you kind of just get a feel for what to look for and, like, what is a good player in these various levels, and, like, who sort of really sticks out. And I think there are it's a really long-winded answer, I know. But there's a lot of leagues, I think, where it's like, okay, you have to set your bar really, really high, you know, for what you really think is a meaningful, impactful player at that level, right? Like, you know, it's funny. I did this a little while ago. Like, I was talking privately with someone about Alexis Lafreniere, with Alexis Lafreniere, for example, who has objectively struggled to be Alexis Lafreniere in the NHL. And you go back and I looked at my data of him in the QMJHL, and then I looked at sort of the video clips I pulled of him, and when you really look at it, like, yeah, like, you know, he was just really good at that level, but some of the goals he was scoring in the games I tracked were probably savable. And just sort of like, I'm just gonna skate decently quickly and pull the puck once past a defender who just isn't very good and just rifle it. And it didn't, when you look back, it's kind of like, yeah, I had some concerns about Lafreniere at the time, but it's like, you know, there was something there. And a lot of that, I think, is just that the league itself is questionable. And you just, again, it's just a matter of experience and a matter of retrospect, looking at guys in the like in the last few years, keeping tabs on the guys that are sort of underperforming now that they've hit the pro ranks in a lot of cases, and some in the NHL, you know, and just seeing the differences and like what the echoes and the similarities are between the guys that make it and the larger number of guys that don't, regardless of the league. Like, just really sort of paying attention to that and why. But there are certainly some leagues where it's just objectively true, like the ones you mentioned in Russia and Finland, where the best teams versus the worst teams, it's going to be a blowout, right? Like, it's not uncommon to see teams in Russia beat SKA's like third level junior team 12-0 and then beat them again 9-0 the next day, and go home and a kid has like 7 points in 2 games and everyone's like, oh, this is really impressive. And then you watch them against, say, SKA's top ranked team, and they're just a guy, right? Like, they just kind of fit in. So yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to answer because I don't think there's a single league that's difficult to evaluate. It's just a matter of how. If you only accounted for Mitchkov's KHL data and viewings, would he be in tier 2 with Fantilli? Would you track more KHL data from past games? So I have, I think, 1 or 2 more games of Mitchkov to go. I'll have to figure it out. I don't know. I'll figure something out with him. I will finish the data set for him. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, like I think you'd have a really hard time convincing me to draft him over Adam Fantilli, but I think you'd have a really hard time convincing me to take Leo Carlsson over him. I think that he's closer to Carlsson than he is to Fantilli, even just factoring in his KHL stuff. But I think with how Mitchkov has played with Sochi, assuming this is the hockey player he is, you'd have to convince me not to draft him at 3. As much as I like Leo Carlsson, like, again, the top 6 of this draft, right? I would say, especially top 5. Like, Bedard for sure 1. I'd say Fantilli for me for sure 2. But Mitchkov, Carlsson, Moore, Smith, like, that's a really good group of players. I think Carlsson is the guy that you bet on long term. But Mitchkov, I think, has more that he shows now, and he does it at the KHL level, which is remarkable, and they're comparable in age. So for me, I don't know. At the end of the year, it might be a Bedard tier, Fantilli tier, Mitchkov tier, and then Carlsson, Moore, Smith. But just because I don't think I'd draft Smith over Mitchkov, for example, and that's usually my benchmark. But it's really close. Like, he's really close to Carlsson. I just look at Adam Fantilli and see so much high-end NHL potential that's, like, pretty blatantly clear. And how much better he's gotten over the course of the year is important to note as well. Mitchkov's no slouch. I think Mitchkov will end up no lower than 4 on my board. But I think he's a pretty solid 3, and I think that's reasonable. Which players from 2022 and 2021 have exceeded your expectations since the draft? Did they address draft day concerns? Yeah, let's take a look. Drafts 2022 and 2021. I mean, it's also really difficult because these drafts literally just happened. So whatever, but like to this point, I've been really impressed with Fabian Lysell. I think that's a guy who I loved in his draft year, and I think I didn't quite expect him at 19 years old to be as effective, even if a lot of it is on the power play. I didn't expect him to be as effective in the AHL as he's been. I watched a couple of games with him, I've watched a couple of games with him over the last little while, and he's been really, really impressive with Providence, and I'm glad the Bruins didn't trade him at the deadline, which would have been an easy thing to do for current help. But other than that, I really have liked how Zach Dean has come along in his development. I thought that was a really nice pickup for St. Louis. He's a guy that, I still wonder about how much he's actually going to score in the NHL. But as sort of a down your lineup, physical, rambunctious guy, like he's a bit of a menace at times, and I didn't really pick up on that in his draft year. He's using his speed, I think, a lot more physically than he was. And I think he would be a really good example. Olin Zellweger has been spectacular since being drafted as well. That's a guy who I think was trending upwards really quickly when I saw him play, and I don't think I quite valued the fact that he was a September birthday and that, that there was just so much offensive potential with him. I still wonder about just how much of an impact he'll bring in the NHL, but I do really like what he does, and the puck control and the skating ability is just so high end that I don't really care. It's looking really good. Who else? Just for 2021, because that's probably easier for me to note. I mean, I'm not surprised about Logan Stankoven, but in terms of guys who've surprised me, I mean, Matthew Nyes, I think has. I think if I'm recalling correctly, in his draft year, he had mono for a while, and or COVID, and was out for a while. I think he also had an injury and never really fully recovered from it, because the games I watched of Matt Nyes, I didn't really see much of anything. And then pretty immediately he just sort of turned a corner and like exploded. I really liked Oliver Kapanen at the World Junior as well. I thought he's looked pretty good. Sasha Pastujov also, I think, has gotten a lot more skilled and a lot more shifty and sort of maybe still not the fastest, paciest, most defensively intense guy, but I think in order to make up for that, he's really improved his skill level, his ability to sort of get inside the middle of the ice a lot more. That was a big problem with him as my draft year, was he was just lobbing pucks on net from all over the offensive zone, and it just wasn't really working out for him a whole lot, but you still saw flashes of some pretty good high-end offensive, creativity and ability. I don't know. I'm getting kind of deep here. I'm just poking around. We'll go from there. We'll call it a day there. That's a few on 2021. In 2022, I don't know. I mean, Philip Biested has had a good year. Jimmy Snuggerud has also had a really good year. I think when you look at his point production, I think Logan Cooley and Matt Nyes have a little bit more to do with that. But Snuggerud is still a heck of a catch and release shooter. He's a really good physical player. Does a lot of things really well in terms of finishing. But he's been better than I expected him to be this season. Who else? I mean, Lane Hudson has been better than I expected him to be. I think the hype train is a little crazy with him, but I have him on my list here for my own team or whatever you want to call it. But he's taken a huge step offensively and looks pretty freaking good as well. Ty Nelson has also been good this year when I've seen North Bay. I think he's taken a good step in the right direction to be more of that offensive defenseman that sort of he always should have been. But yeah, other than that, I don't know. It's too early to tell with a lot of these guys. So, yeah. But there's a few already from 2021 at least. Who do you like more for long-term projectability? Felix Nielsen or David Edstrom? Oh, God. Probably Nielsen, just because I like the pace of his game more. I think he's David Edstrom is more of a sort of sit back and sort of watch the game happen, and just sort of wait things out and observe the game and step in when necessary. And with Edstrom, I think, and with Nielsen, I think there's just a little bit more intensity and shiftiness and skill level relative to Edstrom, who I think just sort of plays with his brain first. And I don't know, one plays center, one's a winger, but I don't know. I like Nielsen a little bit. I think Nielsen plays wing in the SHL, but I don't know. I kind of lean Nielsen a little bit more, even though he's a little bit smaller. But Edstrom, I think, could be a really good sort of minutes-eating, sort of smart 200-foot guy. Like, again, Brian, you're a Leafs guy. Think Pontus Holmberg style, where it's like you kind of watch him and you're like, eh. And then he actually makes a few really nice plays in that game, and you kind of go, okay, now I kind of see what the point is. Jakob Jonsson, hello from Sweden, hello from Canada. Can I have some fun Swedish draft picks from there? Okay. I don't know. Felix Nilsson, we were just talking about him. He's fun. I have recently caught on to Isaac Hedqvist. I think he's awesome, playing for Luleå. Arvid Bergstrom in Djurgården, I think, plays really well as well for an offensive defenseman. Really good, skilled kid. I like Anton Wahlberg as well. Like, not a whole lot of people talk about Wahlberg, but like, if you want to talk, like, if you look at David Edstrom, for example, Wahlberg, he's a similar sized player, but I think he is a more mobile and fluid guy. I think once in a while, Wahlberg is one of these guys where he'll disappear for like 10 minutes and then blow your mind with a play on the rush, like the skill for a big guy that he's got and the shot that he has. He'll just like come out with something out of nowhere, and you're like, well, where was this for the whole game? And he'll pull off something really impressive. So if you can sort of leverage that a little more, I think you could end up with a really interesting player. And I don't hear a whole lot about Wahlberg. Part of me likes Zeb Forsvial. Like, I'll credit Mikhail Holm on this. If you want a fun one that plays at a lower level, Pontus Falk is a kid who plays in the 3rd division. Doesn't score a ton there, but that's mostly because his team is poop. And I don't know. Let me look at the data I have on him, because I think I've done 3 games because I've been interested in him. 3 Hockey Eton games. Like, his team doesn't really get a whole lot of shot attempts for or against. I mean, all of that is also partially because Hockey Eton stinks. But this is a guy who literally does not shoot. He does not shoot from mid-range. He just gets to the net all the time. He's a guy who has taken or created over half of his team's shot attempts when he's on the ice at that level. Pretty good offensive transition guy too. Really fast skater. I would work on his skill level quite a bit because he can lose the puck in transition quite a bit, and just sort of overskate the puck a little bit, and just I think again similar to who are we talking about before? Zach Benson. Like just kind of like get going a little bit too quickly for his own good. But I really like him if you want sort of a lower end, sort of fun Swedish guy playing out there. Who else? Albert Vikman is another one. I think he's an interesting defenseman. I saw Ruslan Zamaldinov not too long ago, and I've been a fan of him a little bit off and on over the course of the year. He's a guy who I don't think is going to probably make the NHL anytime soon, but he also is a guy who he scored a point today in the SHL. Luleå, I think, called up 11 guys. I think Mikhail Holm was saying they called up 11 juniors to play on the team today, and Jamaldinov scored a goal, scored an assist, which is pretty fun. So good for him. What do we got here? Let's see. But those are some fun Swedes that you could take a look at. Thoughts on the Smashing Pumpkins? Oh, very good question, Graham. I like them once in a while. I've seen them live. I saw them live when I was in high school. It was like one of the first shows they played live together in like a number of years, I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm not like huge into them, but like I like the Melancholy and whatever Infinite Sadness artsy fartsy album title. I like that album. That one's pretty good. They're fine. They're a good sort of 90s alt, whatever you want to call it, rock band. I'm more like, if we're talking like 90s alt rock or whatever you want to call it, I'm more of like a Pearl Jam guy. Like I really dig Pearl Jam. Eddie Vedder, like I do Eddie Vedder's voice in my head like during the day on a pretty regular basis because I think he's great. But yeah, I don't know. I don't mind the Smashing Pumpkins. They're perfectly fine. They're good. They definitely have some songs that like make me feel feelings, which you can't say about a whole lot of bands, in my view. Like for me, but the Smashing Pumpkins have some songs where like when they come on, you're like, I am feeling feelings now. Good or bad, whatever. They make you feel feelings, and that's pretty important. Is Hanzek just better Slafkovsky? Please answer an interpretive dance and or slam poetry format. Thank you. Does this help? I don't know. The answer is no. I don't think Hanzek is a better Slafkovsky at all. I actually did a game of him today. He was pretty meh. His data pretty much across the board is pretty meh. So yeah, I mean, easy. It's easy for me. He's not. I think Slafkovsky is significantly a significantly better player than Hanzek. Hanzek, I think, might have better sort of skill, but I think Slafkovsky just brings a whole lot more in a whole lot of other ways that I wish Hanzek brought, to be honest. Could he one day? Sure, but the physical aspect of the game, I think Slafkovsky is way ahead of Hanzek. And that's just the first one. You don't have to answer this one because I'm pretty sure he's only draft eligible in 2025, but have you seen or heard anything on Adam Benak? I've seen him here and there a little bit. I've had reason to poke around with next year's class and the year after. I mean, he's really good, but it's still really early. I think he's really small. And there's a few guys that are that young and like still really, really small. But I mean, right now he is looking like one of the better guys I've seen for 2025. So yeah. He's, we'll see where he is in a couple of years, but he's good. He's not bad. Are there noticeable differences between the WHL, OHL, and the Q that affect how you evaluate prospects? For example, does Bedard's success in the dub relate to other prospects' success in the other leagues? So I'm pretty sure, I feel relatively confident that Quebec is behind those other two leagues. And I think, again, like that's indicated by the volume of players coming out of the Quebec League at a young age in the NHL, slowly starting to taper off a little. And the WHL and NCAA are really taking steps in the right direction. And with the Q, I think a big problem is just the depth of talent is really soft. Like the lower end parts of a Q lineup are really not great, and with the Quebec League I feel like you can get away with a lot more and score a lot of points because there's a lot of guys where I have tracked them over the years and I'm going, okay, like I get that the results are pretty good, but like I don't understand how. And I don't, like, you think about it and go, well, who is an NHL player that produces like this, but like doesn't have the super high end skill to do this way, or doesn't have the raw shot quality, right? Like you look at Quebec goaltending, for example, like the number of Quebec League goaltenders that have even become good AHLers without significantly long NHL runways of like 7-8 years of like development, like a Laurent Boissois. Like you're looking at a lot of goaltenders who really struggle outside of the QMJHL. But that's also the case for a lot of Canadian Hockey League goaltenders. Like Canada is lagging behind the rest of the world when it comes to quality of goaltending, right? Like, yeah, Thomas Milic was really good at the World Juniors, right? But like, who has been the most hyped North or Canadian goaltending prospect in the last few years? Like Ben Gaudreau, and he's really struggled, I think, to stop pucks. But anyways, I look at the Q League as just there just isn't as much pace and physical intensity and really sort of challenging defenses than the WHL and the OHL that kind of sets it behind quite a bit. But between the WHL and the OHL, I really struggle to like nitpick the differences between the two. I think the WHL maybe plays a little bit more of an advanced sort of structured game, but I do think the talent in the OHL, at least up until recently, has been maybe a little better. Like just from poking around and watching some of the WHL draft guys for this year and the OHL draft guys for this year, like I think the WHL pretty handily has a step up, but also these things fluctuate very, very often, and you know, it's not the end of the world. Matatron, hello. Welcome. I've got a hunch that Nate Danielson will end up one of the better NHLers from this draft. How do you feel about his floor and ceiling? Well, his floor is really low, and his ceiling, I think, is really high. You know, I think he's a guy who's got a pretty good shot. He's a really good north-south guy. You know, you're a Sens guy, so think like Zach Ostapchuk, but like with a little bit more finesse in his game and a little less, and like not the physical side. Like a guy who goes up and down the ice really well, you know, makes plays on the rush decently well, funnels pucks to the middle of the ice pretty well. Ostapchuk carried them a lot himself into the middle of the ice, but when I look at a guy like Nate Danielson, I see a guy who's got a little bit more pizzazz in his game, but also it's just not there very much. And with Danielson, like some games I'm going, well, this guy looks like a potential top 20 pick. Sure, like I could see it. And then a couple more games I do, and I'm like, well, this guy just, it's, you know, he plays like a guy who just, like, for example, 3/4 of the shot attempts he's taken in the games I've tracked are from the perimeter. And he's got a good shot, but like he's not taking really good quality shots from those areas, right? Like he's not really being that challenging. But I mean, I don't know. I think with Danielson, again, there's a lot of potential. I think there's a lot of potential, similar to a guy like Riley Heidt, for example. I think there's a lot of potential in his game, but I think there's going to need to be like mindset changes. Like I don't want to diagnose and get in someone's head, but like I think it's about like that sort of killer instinct and like that intensity level that I think guys like Heidt and Danielson kind of lack. And if they gain it and sort of really sort of work on that over time and like bring that out more, then yeah, I think there's a lot of potential, but it's hard to tell at this age for them. It's a tricky one. Like if someone drafts Nate Danielson 6th overall, I probably wouldn't do it. But go off, sure, whatever. I think that's reasonable, but like really risky for me. And the same goes for like a Riley Heidt. But if it's like 20th and beyond, like yeah, fine. Those guys are, all bets are off. Like you may as well take the swing. Bonsoir. Who is this? Jeremy Plourde. Gary is dying to know if you've seen Jaeger play recently because apparently he's been playing better. I have not seen him play recently, but I probably should check in again. The last game I did of him, again, he was fine. Jaeger has been fine. If you want a guy who can be a winger, who maybe cheats a little bit for his offense and is a trigger man, sure, you could do a lot worse. But I look at Braden Jaeger and see a guy where it's like, I have him outside the top 10, so it doesn't matter where I rank him because he's probably going top 10 and someone's going to do it. But if it's like a late first round pick, I'd say past 20. And you just want a guy who can shoot and a guy who can sort of, chip in a little bit here and there, but play best at his best in the offensive zone, then sure, Jaeger could be a decent bet. But I'll check in on him again. Do you have concerns about Benson's upside? I find it hard to see him on a first line on a contending team. Yeah, I mean, a first line NHL player is a very rare job to have. And most players in the draft do not get there, right? Like there's only 90 of those players in the entire world. And those jobs don't really come up that often. So I'm always very hesitant to project players as like, yeah, definitely a first line guy. Like 100% for sure going to be that. Because that job is very, very difficult, right? Like it's really hard. So when I look at a guy like Benson, I'm going, okay, but he might not be a first line guy. And I've got him ranked at 7th. But if I get a guy who will bleed for my team and play in the middle 6 of any team, good or bad, play with a lot of energy, make plays off the boards, be an exceptional forechecker. I'm trying to think of an NHL player that he kind of reminds me of as he is now, and I can't really think of one off the top of my head, but like maybe a Connor Garland kind of thing, but maybe not as skilled. I don't know. Garland's pretty skilled, but I look at Benson and his ability off the puck and go, that'll help. That's going to help. And his ability to make plays off the boards and sort of drive possession in the offensive zone, like that will help. That will help him in the NHL. There are holes in his game that I think will hold him back from being like a 90-point NHL player, which is what you kind of want out of your top end forwards. But I still think he'll be pretty good. And I think his floor is relatively safe. And I think that you give him a couple of years and he's just going to get better and better. He could be a guy that scores 120 points in the WHL next year and then goes to the NHL and never breaks 60 points. Is that disappointing? I don't think so, because I think he's going to bring a lot of things that teams are going to love, even if he isn't scoring points every night. Is Matthew Wood the biggest prospect in the draft? No, that would be Matteo Mann, I think is 6'7". Let me check. Let's just see who the biggest guys on my list are here. Or I'm not on my list, but 6'7", 6'6". Yeah, Elias Zimmerman, Bronson Ride of the Niagara Ice Dogs, Artyom Kashtanov might get drafted. He's a Yekaterinburg boy. He might get a draft pick. Christian Kostadinsky might get drafted. Matteo Mann is 6'5", but Matt Wood's not far behind. Matt Wood's pretty tall. What do you think of David Edstrom? I kind of went over him earlier, like a really smart, capable puck distributing center. Like the game I did in the SHL, he didn't really do a whole lot, but he just knew what to do when the time came. If he was below the goal line in the offensive zone, head up, scanned, found a guy in front of the net, shoveled a pass in front of the net. He didn't, sometimes when I see younger players in the SHL, they just like put their head down, just keep their feet moving and just grind. And that can work. But with a guy like Edstrom, he sort of just has the frame already to sort of protect the puck, have a look, and be able to funnel the puck into the middle of the ice. Off the puck, he got a couple of really good chances in front, just from, lifting a stick and getting a quick scoring chance that way. Just a really smart player. I look at him playing with Frölunda and Noah Dower Nielsen. I don't have Noah Dower Nielsen ranked. I have Edstrom ranked. I think Edstrom, even though he doesn't score like Dower Nielsen does, I think he does a lot of legwork for Dower Nielsen that really takes him a long way and puts him in a favorable position. Oh, you meant biggest project. I thought you literally just said prospect. I'm misreading things. I had a long day. I'll circle back on that. But yeah, I like Edstrom. I mean, if he's there in like the mid rounds, like he could be a decent pick to like maybe be in your bottom 6 one day. I don't think he's very flashy and maybe teams will ignore him for that reason, but he's fun. He's a good rock solid player. But the biggest project, I mean, Matt Wood is up there. I mean, but it depends on what you mean by project. I think Dmitry Simashev is the biggest project who I'd actually like be willing to like go to bat for and like work with. I'd say Axel Sandin Pellikka is another one that is up there. Mikhail Gulyayev is another great example of a guy who I think is a project, but if it works, you could really end up with a really interesting hockey player. William Whitelaw as well, I think is a really good project pick if you want to leave him in college for a few years, especially now that Wisconsin's sort of entering a new era now that Tony Granato has left the school, which, I mean, with all due respect to Tony Granato, who's been a longtime NCAA coach, Wisconsin is kind of like a relic of hockey from 20 years ago and really struggling. So hopefully there's better days ahead because Wisconsin has some fun guys coming to the team for next year. But anyway, those guys would probably be project picks that I would throw in the ring outside of Matt Wood. Thoughts on Alex Rykov and Danil Boot? I haven't seen Rykov in a while. One sec. But if you take everything I said about David Edstrom and just sort of like ramp it up a little bit in terms of like pace and skill level, I think you have an Alex Rykov where there isn't much that he does wrong. There isn't much that he does like extraordinarily well, but he's just a very smart and effective player. Danil Boot is I don't know what to think about him, honestly. Like if someone goes up on draft day and says, with the 9th overall draft selection from Lokomotiv Yaroslavl, Danil Boot, I would not be surprised in the slightest. I'd be very excited because I would hope that team sees the upside that he has and they would just go, yeah, there's risk, but who cares? This guy's a ton of fun. Like, Danil Boot is a guy who I have ranked in a range where I'm like, yeah, this is around where I would take him if he were there. But if he, if it were like 5 or 6 slots higher, like Whitelaw, Ciernik, Height, Mukanov, we're all still on the board. Obviously, they probably will. And it's the first round, and it's like 18th overall, and someone's like, maybe we take Danil Boot. I'm going, yeah, maybe we do take Danil Boot. Like, he is really tall, which is, again, like, I don't dislike big players, right? Like, some people say, like, oh, you would just draft small guys all the time. It's like, well, I think the small guys are the ones that are usually the good players left over in the middle rounds. That's usually the reason that happens. But if I see a player with size that I really like, I'm not going to lie and be like, oh, he's bad because he's big. But when I look at Danil Boot, I see a guy who shows immense potential, but just hasn't really figured out just hasn't really refined it into something that works at higher levels. Like the other day, me and Sam McGilligan, we were chatting privately, and he's like, I haven't seen him play in a really long time, and every time I see him, I think he stinks. And I'm going, okay, fine, but like, I think there's something there with him. Like, there's something. And so we put on a game, and again, I know I what was this, like an hour ago? I said not to do this, or to be very aware of doing this. It's kind of like playing with plutonium, like don't do it unless you really know what you're doing. And we did this. We watched him play against the worst team in the MHL because we're like, all right, let's just see what he can do against guys where he's allowed to do whatever he wants. And you saw the skill level, you saw the evasion. Like once that guy drops a shoulder and starts using crossovers to circle around the offensive zone, you can't get at him. It's really hard to get at him because he's big and not agile, but protects the puck really well. And he's got the skill level to pull the puck away from you to the point where it's like you really are reaching around to try to get at him, and you just can't. He's got a really good shot, and I think his playmaking is also pretty underrated. Like his ability to get the puck into the middle of the ice, look off shooting options and make plays. Like he drags pucks deep into the offensive zone on his own stick, and at the last second goes cross crease, and guys just can't bury it. And I feel like if guys start burying those, he's going to look a lot better. I still see a guy who skating in a straight line, he's clunky and slow and really struggles to sort of generate a gap between guys. And, if he's not in that physically advantageous position, he can get closed out. But I still really love what Danil Boot brings to the table. Like he's just got he's gotten a lot better over the course of the season. Early in the year, it was like he was trying to do whatever he wanted, and sometimes it worked, and when it didn't, it was awful. And now it seems like he's sort of settled in. He's scanning the ice a lot better. making plays where there's actually a recipient for the passes he's trying to make. And there's a lot to like about Boot, I think. And again, like, I have him ranked where I have him ranked. He's at 21. He's been moving up my board consistently over the course of the year. And if you want a guy who's a project, whoever asked about who's a big project in this year's draft, Danil Boot is a guy where on draft day, like, I could see some people ranking him at like 30 and fan bases losing their mind when their team picks him at like 11, going, oh, they picked the big giant from Russia, like Boo Earns, whatever. But I think that there's a lot percolating under the surface there where I'm going, yeah, this could really work out. Like, Danil Boot, with a few more years of development in Russia, you playing more and more minutes, if especially if he sort of gets a little bit more explosive and just gets a little bit more physical and just builds that escape gear that you could potentially get out of him, then yeah, you might have a really interesting winger who can score and set up plays and do it with size. Like, if you want to, again, I'm very hesitant to do this, but people are running around going, who's the next Tage Thompson? Who's the next Tage Thompson? But, like, if there's anyone in this year's draft class who has sort of the skill level, shooting ability, and ability to sort of juggle those two things together to maximize offensive ability, Danil Boot might be that guy. You just need to give him some time, and I think he'll just get better and better. And, I could easily see him being a guy that could get drafted a lot higher than I have him ranked. And I would, if it was me in the draft table with them, I'd go, yeah, okay, I'm okay with this. Like, if we know what we're doing and we have a really good development plan in place and we're going to keep close contact with him in Yaroslavl for the next few years, then yes, absolutely, I'm down. Because he could be a lot of fun. He could be a lot of fun if he works out. Would like to hear your take on Carter Sutherland. Good, fluid, mobile, physical dude. He's big and can skate pretty well. I think he's in my second round or early third, something like that. It's hard to really project him. I haven't seen him in a while. I'll also admit that, but he's a really good puck carrier. He's got some good skill in transition as well. I would love to see him shoot the puck a little less. He's just volume shooting from the point a lot rather than sort of cycling pucks around and looking for other options. He can sort of throw pucks into the front of the net a lot and do that, which can drive offense. But in terms of just sort of like, he's a big time catch and release guy from the point a lot. But I don't know, like, going both ways, I think his transition game is pretty good. He's got a good stick. He's a good sort of stick checker, effective at that as well. But his footwork also allows him to cover ice pretty well, fetch loose pucks, make space for himself. He's a good puck protector. There's a lot to like about him. So yeah, I mean, if he's like I feel like a team might reach on him and pick him in the second round because he's pretty good skater. He's pretty big, like a lot of good stuff. But if you were there in the sort of mid rounds and you've got some really good high skill guys in the first couple rounds, yeah, I could easily see a Carter Sutherland being an interesting bet if you want a big, fluid puck mover who, doesn't back down defensively either. Good evening, Joe. I am remembering to hydrate. Which drafted player not current in the NHL has the highest offensive upside? Well, let's take a quick look here at this list. This once it loads. The LA Kings currently have the highest NHL score player in my entire database of players the teams have already drafted. So once this loads, Brant Clark, technically on paper. But that's probably not the best answer. But I mean, you know what? Highest offensive upside, it might be Brant Clark. Olin Zellweger as well, if you want to talk about defensemen. For forwards, let's take a look at, 2022. Logan Cooley, I would say, is certainly part of that list. What else? Pavel Mitchkov would be fun. Luke Hughes, not currently in the NHL. Yeah, I mean, like, that might be, Logan Cooley might be it, to be perfectly honest with you. In another universe, it could be Rodion Amirov. Screw cancer, William Valinder has taken a lot of good steps offensively. Any of those, right? But I'd say Logan Cooley probably takes the cake, to be honest. Kevin, hello. Question for my fantasy league: Lekaramaki, Ogren, Furcus, Howard, Beestead. Who would you pick? Well, I don't know. Probably. I mean, it depends on your categories. It depends. Yeah, it all really just depends on your categories. If it's like points only, I might go Lekaramaki or Furcus. All categories, maybe Ogren or Beestead. Howard, I mean, I watched Isaac Howard at University of Minnesota Duluth the other day. I think that if you give him time, he'll be just fine. Like, there's some stuff where I'm going, yeah, you can easily see why there are problems in his game and why he's not producing, but I think it's all fixable stuff. Like, the talent is still definitely there. It's just a matter of like coaching him and getting into the right habits. Another one: Amadeus Lombardi, Adam Sikora, David Goyette, Elias Salamonson. I don't know which Hughes that is. Luke, Jack, I don't know, and Odelius. I don't know. Again, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, of all of those guys, I probably would think the highest NHL potential lies with, Hughes or Salamonson or Goyette. Odelius is also pretty good. I like Amadeus Lombardi. He's been good this year. And Adams, I mean, they're all good. I don't know. They're all good. It's hard to, I don't know. I'm sorry. It's hard. Thoughts on Bryce McConnell Barker? I think he's heating up. I've never been a fan. I don't know. Just never been a fan of Bryce McConnell Barker. And, how, I don't even know what kind of production he's putting up this year. I don't know, but last I checked, it was kind of like middling for, like just over a point per game for a D+1 is okay. And I've never really been super over the moon with McConnell Barker, to be honest. Servac Petrovsky worth a pick. Any comments on his game or potential? Honestly, I haven't seen enough Petrovsky to give you a good answer on that. I don't know. I think he's a guy. I've never really been like enamored with his NHL upside. I don't know. He's a decent high pace guy who can slip passes through traffic and everything, and that helps him. But I don't know if there's a whole lot there, to be honest. When is draft guru superstar Tony Ferrari coming on? Well, if he would ever bother responding to me about anything, in terms of collaboration, then yes, I'm half kidding. I talk to Tony quite a bit. Not sure. We'll have to put a pin in that one. Why do you think there's such a big disparity with your ranking and the one of Prodman, for example? Is it the importance he puts on size? I can't answer that question. I don't know. I think part of it is that I am way less afraid of size. I'm way less concerned with it. I don't know. I don't know. I look at Corey Prodman's work, and I know he does the work. I don't think he communicates it super well and like gets his ideas across in terms of, like his rating system really, to me, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I think your rating system does matter. Like how you communicate is everything. And I don't know. I don't know. But look, if you want to put importance on size, that's your philosophy, right? For me, I think of hockey as like, I would rather have a bunch of really high intensity water bugs flying around and just constantly hounding the opponent, and constantly trying to put the opponents on their heels. Can you do that with big players? Sure, but it's just tougher. And again, I've been over this before in this stream, right? Like, there are large players that I like. It's just when a player is large, they have to carry certain traits that aren't just, well, they're big and therefore this. Like they need to combine that with other things. So for me, it's, I see a small player and go, well, I look at William Whitelaw and go, yeah, he pulls a puck wide on a David Reinbacher and just keeps his feet moving and goes hard and tries to blow right through him. I think he's got the speed and the skill level to do it. But, could that change? Sure. Sure. They're ranked in a similar area for me. But I don't know. I don't know. This is the whole thing about scouting, right? Like, my philosophy is just, I guess, fundamentally different than his, and what my philosophy relies upon is a lot more concrete analysis, really, like the proof of the pudding, right? This is, there's evidence that this player is good and bad at these things because of these data points and how it looks on the video in conjunction, right? And I know Pronman's not sitting around gathering data himself on all of these performances. He's sitting in the press box watching things and taking notes. To me personally, that's not, I wouldn't be very good at what I do. I mean, I might not be very good at what I do for all I know. But I wouldn't feel as confident about how I see these players if that's all I did. And maybe he disagrees, whatever, that's fine. Great, cool. But it's not for me to say like, well, one is better than the other, right? Like that's up to, I don't know. We don't work in the NHL, right? Like we can't actually apply our competitive differences. Anyway, can we pretty much pencil in Reinbacher to Detroit with one of their 2 picks? Just seems like Yzerman, Seider. Just seems very Yzerman with Seider, Edvinsson, Reinbacher, Wallinder. I don't hate that. Yeah, I mean you could, sure, fine. I don't mind Reinbacher. I think Reinbacher is one of these guys where you can probably get a prospect that has 80 to 90% of the value 2 rounds later, right? Like a Tom Wallinder, a Jakub Dvorak, who else? Those are the main ones, I would say. Carter Sotheran, Hoyt Stanley, like guys later in the draft that have somewhat similar games that they may not play against men, but like at the end of the day, they might very well, show pretty well. Does Dvorsky -2 mean he's a middle 6 center? No, that just means that after, so the plus and minuses are just like after the game I tracked, that's where they moved on my ranking. So I did another game of Dvorsky and moved him down 2 slots after the game was over. Who do you have between Moore and Smith? I've seen a lot of people compare them. I've got Moore at 5 and Smith at 6. Like the data between the two, Oliver Moore wins, right? When I look at the data between the two, it's a pretty clear-cut Oliver Moore victory, except in like very specific circumstances. With Will Smith, I think you see extremely high-end creative thinking and skill, whereas with Oliver Moore, you just see a kid who is a monster all over the ice. Oliver Moore plays the style of play at center that I am always looking for, with a lot of speed, a lot of intensity at both ends, selfless play to move the puck to his wingers. Oliver Moore, the last game I did this week, he looked awesome. And his line mates were Beckett Hendrickson and Will Vogt, who are, all due respect, major downgrades from Will Smith playing with Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard, like major downgrades. And I look at Oliver Moore and I think that there's a lot to like there. And if Oliver Moore were on that first unit with Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, or even Oliver Moore with, say, Gabe Perreault and Will Smith on his wings, it would be a heck of a line. I see Will Smith as more of a winger in the NHL. I think he's a guy that you sort of alleviate the defensive role that a center kind of has, and you put him in the wing. You say, hey, because Will Smith, just on paper in the work I've done, just is not a great defensive player. He's not a guy who is super high speed up the middle of the ice and like in transition, but the skill level and the creativity, like once the puck is in the offensive zone, I would say he's right up there with Bedard, Fantilli, Mitchkov in terms of the skill level, the quality of his shot, the ability to spot passing options and just create. Like, I absolutely believe and can see why this guy has 89 points in 45 games with the NTDP this year. He's just outstanding offensively. But when I look at Oliver Moore, like, the numbers just don't lie. He is on paper, dominant player on that team. In a lot of ways, and it's pretty measurable that the dominance sort of comes through him. But again, like, it's just 2 different types of players, really. Like, one is a quarterback, and the other is, just a tremendous finisher. And which one would you rather have? How tolerant are you of softer defensive play? Do you really want a center? Do you really think he's a winger? I don't know. It's going to be, it's just really interesting to see how much Oliver Moore, to me, has gotten better over the course of the year and how just good he is right now. Timur Mukanov's upsides and style or NHL comp. Yeah, I mean, Mukanov, I think he's a long shot, but he's a really good one. Again, when I watch Mukanov, the VHL data that I have, like, we'll start with this. When I tracked VHL data from him, that's the Russian second division pro league, between him and Matvei Mitchkov, in a lot of areas, he was a lot better than Matvei Mitchkov at that level when Mitchkov was with St. Petersburg. His transition data was better. His, the shooting data wasn't as good, but the playmaking and shot attempt creation for his line mates was way better. And Mukanov is a guy who also plays on a team that cannot score to save their life. But he gets his chances. I mean, he's a guy who I think deserved to score a lot more than he did. I really, really like him. I mean, in terms of who he is as an NHLer, again, Connor Garland comes to mind. Like, I don't know. Like, I think Connor Garland's a guy who is an undersized guy. You don't really think about the defensive play that an undersized player could have. But Mukanov's speed and agility and quickness give him so many tools off the puck to sort of close gaps, challenge guys, and just cause turnovers. Like, it doesn't matter that he's not the most physical guy in the world if he's skating at you at 35 kilometers an hour, lifting your stick really quickly and turn it around. And that's what he does. And he's just off like a rocket ship. And I love that about him. I think that that's something that you want on your team. And if he's a guy that is there in the third, fourth round, to me, that's an easy home run swing to take, right? Like, you may as well take the chance on him, even if he is a smaller player. An NHL comp, yeah, like Connor Garland comes to mind. Like, I'm trying to think of smaller players who are underrated at both ends, that just through their tenacity and quickness drive a lot of really good results. And I think that that's similar to Mukanov. He's listed at center, but I don't know if I see him as a center in the NHL, but I love him in open ice. I think in open ice, he's a great player. Along the boards, like, he's going to lose physical battles, but like, he gets right back in there and keeps battling, which I love. Has Molgaard been rising? Yeah, I mean, over the course of the season, yeah, he's in my first round now, like late first round. I don't know. I could see him being a good, smart sort of third line center, really skilled, pretty quick, agile, lots to like about him. Smart, especially in his, especially offensively, like he can look at secondary options and make plays. Really fun player. I like him. What do you think is the Habs mystery big player that, is it Brian Wild mentioned? Just can't see it being Reinbacher. Man, I don't know. Like, this is the part of the year where the media just starts saying things, reading into draft history or reading into what, look, is it as simple as saying Nick Bobrov really likes big Europeans, therefore let's look at the big Europeans eligible this year and assume the Habs like him? If that's what you want to spend your time thinking about in your head, like, fine. I find in my experience, like, I don't think that that's, I think as a fan, I think that you just kind of have to, like, strap in and just wait and see until the draft. Because there's just, I mean, again, like, Brian is in the media. His job is to get people talking about his work and get people to be interested and click on his articles and everything, like, just like everybody else. And so I don't know. I also don't think I buy it, because teams, especially in March, like, I don't think teams are even close to being like, this guy is our guy. This is our guy. I just don't think that that's the case. I mean, maybe, but I don't think that's true. I think if you still have the time to make better analysis, like, there's still 4 months, just under 4 months left. 3.5 months left. That's still a long time to formulate your opinions and figure things out. What is the team doing? Alex Belzile has scored in 3 of 3 shots. I'm pretty sure I've lost 20. Oh my God. I don't know. I haven't been watching the Habs. Honestly, I haven't watched much NHL hockey, like, at all recently. Did you see any Bachelnikov earlier this year while watching Mitchkov at SKA? I mean, a little bit. He's fine. He's a good, agile skill guy. He's fine. Thoughts on Dawson Mercer's recent form? I mean, I've always really liked Dawson Mercer. I mean, he's, again, like, he was one of these Q guys where super high skill, you could see it. And that's what made me interested in him. But I just didn't see enough of it. But I was like, all right, if he just plays with that skill more and, like, challenges guys more, he could be a really impressive player, and he's starting to do that. starting to do that, which is great. So yeah, he's been very good. Are you a fan of F1? Favorite team? Yes, I am. Just like everybody else. I got sucked in during the pandemic, early in the pandemic. A friend of mine told me, hey, you should probably watch Drive to Survive, because I watched it all in a day. And I went, okay. And I did. And then I showed it to my wonderful partner, who in about 5 minutes, all she said from the other room was, and got hooked. Unfortunately for us right now, we are a McLaren household. I am not a fan of jumping ship when things are bad, especially being someone who grew up in Toronto as a hockey fan. So, this is nothing to me that McLaren's at the bottom of the standings right now and it's a tumultuous mess. But, yeah, I am a fan of Formula One. We've got, around the corner here, down the hallway in my basement, we have a wall of Formula One memorabilia. We have what do we have? We've got a spray painted painting framed of Sebastian Vettel in Aston Martin gear. We have another one that was a gift to me of Daniel Ricciardo. Oh God, I'm pretty sure it's Daniel Ricciardo down there. Another spray painted painting of him, and those are really great. And centering them is for our anniversary. I got my wonderful partner a spot on the checkered flag in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and they send you like a picture of the person waving the flag and your little square of the flag cut out and mounted in a display, and then they ship it to you. It's really cool. So we have that stuff mounted on the wall around there. So we are Formula One fans. We went to the race in Montreal last year, which was a ton of fun. Highly recommended. Just plan it well in advance, and buy tickets as soon as you can. But it was a lot of fun. And yeah, we're unfortunately a McLaren household, but we're ride or die. We're not wavering. I like the Lando Norris vibe, Oscar Piastri. Sure, we'll see how it goes, but cool. But I'm really excited for this season. I'm really excited for this Formula One season because I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how things go over the next over the season because of the competition and all the new drivers and everything. It's very exciting. It's a good time. Thoughts on the Flaming Lips? Honestly, I never really got into them. It's not because I don't like them. Like, there's not very many musical acts where I'm like, yeah, they suck. But the Flaming Lips, I just never really got into them. Like, I've listened to their stuff a little bit. Definitely when I was in high school, when I was like I'm going to listen to all kinds of different music because I'm an artsy-fartsy teenager who thinks he's better than everybody. In that little phase that a lot of people go through. With the Flaming Lips, they were a band where like for a day I was like, I'm going to like the Flaming Lips at the end of the day because they're cool. And then at the end of the day, I'm going, I don't know, this might just not be for me. They're kind of like not saying these bands are similar, but they're like in the similar vein to me as like bands like the Grateful Dead or like Fish, where I'm like, I get why people like them. I get it, but they're just not for me. I like Fish, but like not, some people really like Fish and I don't really quite get it, but that's cool. Whatever. It's music, whatever. You like what you like. Coyotes general manager said getting a potential top 15 pick from Ottawa is what sold the Chychrun deal. Do you think the draft is really as deep as people are saying? It's a good question. I think the top end of this draft, like the top 10 or 12 are potentially really, really good. And then it's like another group of I'd say 12 to 25 that are really interesting, like really big mishmash of like really interesting players. And then I'd say there's a pretty big bubble of like solid options that have strengths and weaknesses that some of them will work and some of them won't. And I just, I think that's fine. I think that this draft is maybe not like people always are sitting around going, oh, is this the next 2003 draft? And I don't think you can ever look at a draft class and definitively be like, this draft class is unbelievably deep. I look at this draft class and say there's, what I've been telling people is like, at what point in the draft class do I start going like, I don't know, like at my ranking list where I'm going, okay, yeah, like the guy at 70, how much better is he than the guy at 80, right? Like not much at all. And, better. And for me, that number starts around like 50, maybe 45 ish, where beyond that, it's just like, I don't know, take who you like. And in previous years, that number maybe has been 30. I'd say since 2020, this has been one of the more exciting groups of players, one of the more interesting groups of players, I'd say. Certainly, I think it's a stronger class than last year. But, you know, like, look, if the thing I would say to that about what Bill Armstrong said was like, well, don't count out the Ottawa Senators because, you know, like I said, I've said this for a month, right? Like, it is just written in the stars that by some grace of the hockey gods, the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators are going to play each other, and the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to lose because that's just how it goes. And the Ottawa Senators have the momentum of being, just to date myself and make myself look incredibly old and uncool, the Ottawa Senators just have Riz right now. And the Toronto Maple Leafs don't have Riz. The Toronto Maple Leafs are trying to, like, impose Riz on people, but the Ottawa Senators are just like, we're just the Ottawa Senators and people like us, right? Like, I don't know. I'm being dramatic, but sometimes sports are drama, and you just know that something like that is going to happen. They're going to go on some heroic run and something incredible is going to happen. I don't know. But I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, like, if I'm Bill Armstrong, I wouldn't count that happening. I just wouldn't count on a top 15 pick based on where the Ottawa Senators seem to be headed. But you never know. It's entirely possible. And if you get a top 15 pick in this year's draft, then sure, you could end up with someone good. But the difference is you actually have to draft someone good. And there's no guarantees that teams are going to, you know, draft someone good just because they have a high pick, right? Like, look at the Arizona Coyotes last year, right? Their first round picks ended up being Logan Cooley, which thumbs up. But then, you know, trading a bunch of draft capital to take Connor Geekie and drafting Maverick Lamoureux in the late first round, like, they left a lot on the board. So if they trade Jacob Chychrun and come out of the first round of this year's draft with insert whoever here that I'm not thinking, like Samuel Hanzek, I'm going, yeah, like, probably may as well have kept Jacob Chychrun. But, you know, again, I don't dislike Hanzek, but if it's a top 15 pick, I feel like you could do a lot better than him. Where were we? I lost my spot again, of course. What else is new? If Detroit, Minnesota, and LA offered you a job, who would you pick? Well, Minnesota, and I'll tell you why. I've never been to Detroit. At least I've driven through it. I would love to work for the Red Wings because the Red Wings are just such a historic franchise, and the fans are great. I think Detroit fans are some of the most passionate, hockey-crazed fans on the planet, and I love that. LA, I've heard very mixed things about that place in general. I've never actually set foot in California, to be perfectly honest, but LA, like, I think the climate would be amazing, sure. Like, life in California would be awesome for many reasons, but also, like, I'd be moving there, and I just don't know. I look at Minnesota and go, number one, I'd probably be working for Judd Brackett, who is a pretty darn good person to work for, number one. Number two, I've never been to Minnesota, but I love that area of the States. I've been to Wyoming, I've been to Montana, I've been to Idaho, Colorado. I love that area of the States. It's some of the most beautiful, whatever you want to call it, out there. And I love the idea of Minnesota. I've heard great things about living there in terms of quality of life. And again, you've got crazy, crazy fans in Minnesota, and I would love to be there. I think LA would be really cool, but, like, I could see myself in a place like Minnesota for a long period of time, as opposed to, like, Detroit or LA. But that's just me when I first get, you know, off the top of my head. Thoughts on Sebastian Cossa? He's a goalie. I don't know. I don't know. Oh, Graham. Yeah, Graham's a California boy, and I know Graham pretty well, and I trust his opinion. LA sucks. The climate is overrated. Terrible traffic with very little public transit. Nights near the coast are nice, though. That is generally the vibe I get from other people who have traveled there. My current supervisor traveled to LA for a week and a half, I think, and he came back and said very similar things. But he said he likes the vibe in LA, like the sort of just vibe, but also that, you know, it's a bit of a weird city. It's a weird, sprawling metropolis of strangeness. But anyway, yeah, I would say Minnesota. But yeah, thoughts on Sebastian Cossa. He's on his NHL path, I guess. Like, he's been really good in the ECHL over the course of the year. We'll see where it goes. I just don't really know what to do with Cossa. I don't know. I don't know enough about goaltending to like be definitive. Hello, Alexandre Giroux. Did Riley Kidney's play this season make you change your mind a little bit on him? I mean, not really. I mean, he's a good offensive QMJHL player. Like, I think he's been very good. But I still struggle to project a guy like Kidney. I think he'll be a good AHLer. Maybe he can chip in the NHL. Like, he's attacking the net a little bit more from what I remember, just a little bit more tenacious and skilled, applying himself in the middle of the ice, which is kind of what he needed to do. You know, I like Riley Kidney, but again, like, the bar is pretty high, and we'll see. What do you think of Maxim Sturbach? Good boring. Like, sits back a lot, perfectly adequate player. I think he's going to go in the first 2 rounds or something, and I wouldn't do it. But if you just want someone who can eat minutes and like move pretty well, he's pretty shifty off the blue line, then yeah, I think you could do a lot worse than Maxim Sturbach. Who's one prospect of last year's draft that's surprising you right now, or one that's disappointing? We kind of went over that earlier in the show. Which team has the brightest future after the 2023 draft? Ducks, Habs, Stars, Devils, Seattle Sabres. You can ask me after the 2023 draft, because like those teams could botch their draft picks easily, and you know. But I mean, assuming teams continue to draft pretty well, I mean, you can't really argue with how the Ducks have built their system since 2019. Seattle has a pretty good crop of guys. The Sabres have also drafted decently well. I don't know. They're all good, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but it all depends on how things go in the 2023 draft. Do you think Isegai gets drafted this year? No, probably not. I'd be surprised if he was, but I feel like he's going to be a guy who just gets better in college over the years, and then he's a free agent signing, and I'm sitting there going like, well, yeah, you know. The 2023 draft was seen as a very good and deep one. After doing your work all year, do you agree? A lot better than previous. We kind of went over that already. Conrad Bigham says drop a like. Yeah, you should all drop a like. Do it. Is Marcel going to get drafted? If so, where and when? I don't know. I wouldn't draft him. Maybe, but I don't know. I don't think so. Why are right-handed defensemen seen as more valuable? Well, I think it's because shooting right-handed on its own is rarer. Like, if you sample 100 hockey players, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure that shooting right is rarer. And having a good defender, like, having a bad defender shows more on your team to me than having a bad winger, right? Like, or like a bad center with good defense, you can make that work. But bad defense with good forwards makes it a lot harder. So if you have left and right-handed side defensemen, or right-handed shot defensemen, left-hand shot defensemen, and shooting right is rare, and bad defense is a big problem, then it is pretty coveted to have that rarer right-hand shot D. I'm a right-hand shot D, so therefore give me money. But in the NHL, yeah, I mean, I see it that way. I mean, I'm a lefty in life. Like, I write with my left hand and I shoot right in hockey. So I think there's a link between that. Like, right-handed people tend to be left-hand shots and left-handed people tend to be right-hand shots more often. I could be wrong on that, but that also makes, I think it's just that right-handed shots are just, on the whole, if you sample 1,000 hockey players, more will shoot left than right. And I'm trying to remember, because I've bought hockey sticks in stores before many times over the course of my life, and for some reason in the back of my mind, I'm going, there's always more left-handed sticks than right-handed sticks. But I could be wrong. I might be wrong on that. If there's any Sport Check employees who stock there, and you know off the top of your head, please let me know. It's pretty safe to say that geopolitics caused some Russians to be taken later on than they should have been in the last year's draft for skill-wise, like Miroshnichenko, Yurov, Gleb, and Grudinin. Well, I mean, Miroshnichenko had cancer, and I'd say Yurov went right around where he should have gone. Trevor Trikazov and Grudinin, yeah, I mean, I don't know what happened there. Any guess to how far Russians will fall this year, Mitchkov especially? I doubt Mitchkov actually falls. The only way Mitchkov falls in the draft is if he literally goes to NHL teams and goes, I don't think I'm going to come over until I want to, right? Like, like I might just keep signing in St. Petersburg and just be a KHL guy. But if I'm an NHL team, I am in his ear and his agent's ear a lot and going like, are you sure that you want to play hockey in Russia for the next 7 years? Like, are you really sure? Really? Because I probably wouldn't be, right? Like, I probably wouldn't be so sure. And I mean, again, it's just do your homework. Like, if you're an NHL team, do your homework. But even it's like Andrew Crystal, right? Like, even if Andrew Crystal has these issues that people say he has and it could withhold him, I have a really hard time believing that he's still not one of the 20 best options in this year's draft to draft. With Matvei Mitchkov, assuming his play with Sochi is what he is and can be, I have a really hard time believing that Mitchkov is anything outside one of the 6 or 7 best players in this year's draft. If he's there at 6, 7, 8, you should draft Matvei Mitchkov and just go, we'll work on developing a relationship with him and maybe bring in some other Russians that can help him adjust to North America, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's the right city environment that might check out with what he's looking for. I don't know. It just depends on your homework and what you know and what you're trying to figure out. So with Mitchkov, yeah, I don't think, I don't think it's going to be that big of a difference for him. I mean, some other Russians, maybe it'll be a factor, right? Like, there might be some Russians who are like, I just don't want to leave Russia ever. It's my home country. I don't want to leave. I don't know why, but whatever. That's perfectly reasonable. And yeah, they might slip in the draft. It's happened before. But like, the guy that I heard the most concrete rumors about that with was Alex Pashin. 2 or 3 years later, he signs his entry-level deal, right? Like, a part of the reason he went in the 7th round was because teams were going, yeah, but like, are you ever going to come over? And was kind of like, I don't know. And now he's come over and starting to work in the AHL. So it's, it is what it is. But to me, it's not usually as much of a concern as people make it out to be. I remember people being concerned about Vasily Podkolzin, right? And like, again, like, how many Russians really, like, go back and look at the history. How many Russians that are worth drafting have been drafted and just never come over? If anything, it was more common in the 90s and 2000s when Russia was trying to be a lot more liberal, when those Russian guys were just being drafted and either never coming over or never seriously considering a long run in the NHL, right? And nowadays, it's very rare for Russians to go to Russia and stay there forever and never, ever, ever come over. So, yeah, I don't know. Making millions of dollars in North America can be very enticing. It can be very enticing. It's a lot of rubles, and in the future, it might be a lot more rubles. Who do you like the most in the biggest steals of the last draft in Elliot Desnoyers, Alexis Gendron, Jacob Melanson, Hines, and Arcuri? Well, it's very, very early to label those guys steals. But I'd say of all those guys, Elliot Desnoyers is probably the guy I'm most interested in. Alexis Lafreniere has scored 9 goals and 5 assists for 14 points in his last 19 games. So good. I mean, that's a 60-point pace. Yeah, good. Right. That's a 60-point pace. That's very good. Is it a first overall scoring winger type pace? That's not for me to answer, but people really, really thought Alexis Lafreniere was like a really incredible talent, and maybe he still could be. Can't say it's impossible, but, it is. Here we are, right? We'll see where it goes. Where do you see a drop-off in tiers? Bedard is on his own. Do you group Fantilli, Mitchkov, Karlsson together? So, for me, I've got Bedard and then Fantilli, and then Mitchkov, Karlsson, Moore, Smith, and then Benson, Crystal, Simishev, Sandin, Pelika, Leonard, Brindley, Perron, and then there's just a big bunch of dudes after that for me. Where do you... the Milic and Suhanik getting drafted. Who has better chances, 3rd or 4th round? I mean, in my view, Suhanik has a longer track record of projectably good goaltending. He spent multiple years facing like 38 shots a night playing behind the Tri-City Americans, who are not a particularly great defensive team. So he's getting a lot of practice being shelled with hockey pucks, whereas Thomas Milic plays behind probably the best CHL team out there for the last 2 years. And that gives you a lot of benefits, and his workload is significantly lighter than Sohanek if you look at the data. So for me, I mean, I might swing on Sohanek, but there's other goalies that are younger, like 2 years younger, that I'm a little more interested in personally. Can you show Oliver Moore's data? I cannot. I literally cannot. I have to be a lot more protective about my data this year for reasons that will be clear in the near future. How did the NHL score get created? Also, how much value does it hold? So I've been developing it and tweaking it over the last 6 years. So basically all it really is just taking a player's production and adjusting it for their age, their position, whether they're forwards or defense, the league and the league that they play in. So just to basically give me a general idea of, like, historically speaking, how good a player's production rate is. Do I really think that much about it? Not really, right? Like, the thing, you know, like I don't want to like dump on, say, Byron Bader, right, who makes a living posting his model on Twitter, right? If you look at the charts he posts and you look at the closest comparables, it's often very much like Patrick Kane and then 4 guys who never played in the NHL. And it's, to me, that's a really good indicator of how uncertain data analysis and prospect analysis is. It's just really hard when all you have is production to go, this player looks a lot like this player. You just don't really have that much information, right? And I know he uses like height and weight and league to sort of scale it a little bit better, but you know, like he'll bring up a player A and a player B and say, well, their bar charts look like this, but then you look at the players those two players compare to, and they're just wildly different and all over the map. And it's like, you know, it just seems like selective bias to me, in which, you know, can be problematic for analysis purposes. And so for me, I think NHL score is a decent barometer of like, here are the players that I'm interested in, and here are the ones I should check out and see if there's more to see here. And then from there you sort of go, okay, well, here's what I do buy into and here's what I don't. And the tracked data that I have also really helps sort of isolate things a little more. For me, I use it as more of just a general overall high level observational tool more than anything, to be honest. Is my version of NHLE different than the other ones people use, like Byron? Yeah, I mean, mine is my own, right? Like, I have fitted my own age curve to it. I just inflate defensive production because defensemen, I did a lot of work to sort of figure out the amount of production differences there are between defensemen and forwards, and I think I've come to a pretty decent balance of like the scaling factor that I can add to defensemen. The league difficulties I've taken, I think my league difficulties came from Rob Volman years ago, and then I added in the guy who works for the Mariners now, who posted the salad and the pig pooping and all that stuff. That guy made some league equivalencies, and I sort of took those into consideration and then sort of tried to build my own and just sort of found a weird middle ground, and I've adjusted it here and there over the course of the last few years to look a little bit better fitted to the data. So mine, I think, is very different from what Byron Bader would be using, I think. Any reason for Otto Stenberg's lack of under 20 production? I think a lot of it is that he just doesn't, he kind of lacks that finishing oomph, right? He's decently skilled, but, you know, and he's an okay shooter, but he's not a great shooter. He is very skilled, but I mean, like, in full flight, his ability to dangle around defensemen and drive wide or drive inside, it's just kind of limited. But he's a guy who I think shows a lot of potential in terms of, just the pace of his game, his quickness, the skill level, and I would just staple him to a skills coach and get him shooting the puck a lot better, both stationary and in motion. I'd get him quicker with his hands in tight for sure. That would be a huge thing I would exacerbate with. I would work on with him. He's a fun player. It's just a matter of, is it enough to really score at higher levels? And right now I don't think it is, but it certainly could be. Final plug for some dudes: Andre Loshko, Kalen Parker, Anthony Romani, Felix Nielsen, and Aaron Minetian. Yeah, those guys are all fine. I haven't seen much of Romani, and I'm not huge on Loshko, but Parker, Nielsen, and Minetian are pretty fun. I'm going to actually tab over before we continue with questions to a question I actually got in DMs from Twitter from someone who remained nameless. So the question is, let me just try to read it properly. When trying to predict future NHL success, which I assume impacts your rankings, how much do you factor ability to succeed in the NHL in the playoffs? Why I ask is, not a lot of small defensemen thrive in the playoffs that are not elite players. Is it worthwhile to draft players that are not designed for your ultimate goal? It's a very good question. So what I did before the show was I actually went on Natural Stat Trick, because this is the only website I could find that actually had playoff-only data. I was trying on Evolving Hockey, and I couldn't figure it out. I don't know, maybe I'm dumb, but I couldn't figure it out. And I've sorted the guys who played the most. So these are all of the playoff games from 2020 through 2022 playoffs combined, with sort of basic on-ice 5-on-5 metrics relative to their team and a minimum of 200 minutes played at 5-on-5. So I've sorted them by time on ice per game played, and just sifting through this list of guys where I think expected goals against per 60 relative to your team is a pretty good way to gauge defensive ability for a defenseman, right? And so right now, like right away, I see Roman Josi as one of the best defensive players. Ryan Ellis, also a net negative, or a net positive, I guess you would say, defensive value player. Morgan Riley as well. Adam Fox, Joel Edmondson is on here, but Miro Heiskanen, Alex Pietrangelo, Jeff Petrie, even Jamie Alexiak, Jacob Slavin, there's a brand here. Justin Falk, right? Like Matt Dumba. To me, there's a brand of defensemen here who, in the playoffs, at least when it comes to suppressing dangerous chances against, they are all still very good skaters and guys that are not really known for their physical intensity, right? Like, they don't play that playoff style. No one's looking at Miro Heiskanen or Roman Josi and going, boy, when the playoffs start, those guys just really know how to step up and be physical and intense. And these are the guys playing massive minutes. And a lot of these guys playing massive minutes are forgivably not suppressing defense better than their teammates, right? So to me, and also when I think about it, I go, you are drafting players who are part of your team. The vast majority of the games they will play in their career is in the regular season. So it really doesn't make sense to me to construct a team and draft based on, well, they might not be very useful in the regular season, but when we make the playoffs, they're going to be tough to beat. And I find, again, like, I don't think it's a very, like, I think in the era of social media, over the long term, I think that the amount of shenanigans in the NHL playoffs that players get away with that you can't get away with in the regular season, I think will go down as time goes on, right? Like, the reason why teams go out and get guys like Ben Sherratt or whoever is because they go out in the playoffs and break the rules, but they don't call the rules. And I think that it's in many cases it's gotten to the point where there are so many fans that look at things that happen on the ice in the playoffs and go, this is unacceptable. Like, you cannot have this happening, right? And the amount of pressure every single year to sort of make positive changes in order to make the playoffs at least more in line with the rules is going to be more and more intense, because more and more fans are just going to get more and more upset. And at the end of the day, yeah, fan pressure does affect things, right? Like, it does affect things, and the game can change. So to me, I always think about it as like, well, good hockey players Like, I just fundamentally disagree with the philosophy of, like, you have to set aside objectively good hockey players to pursue the ones that break the rules when they can break the rules more. That just, maybe that's just me being naive and whatever. But to me, I see it as, I see it as, yes, you can play as physical as you want, but you can, there's a lot more to it in terms of actually driving good results, right? Like Ben Sherratt is not a name that I mentioned of guys that are a net negative in terms of suppressing stuff against, right? Like right here, expected goals against per 60 relative to the teammates. Ben Sherratt is the second worst in the National Hockey League over the last few years. Cody Ceci, another guy who kind of can ramp it up in the playoffs, again, amongst the worst. Colton Parayko is huge. Darnell Nurse is another one. So yes, you might get guys that take the rules take the rules and throw them in the trash, but at the end of the day, they're still not performing very well. And that, a lot of people got really hyped about Ben Sherratt, for example, after Montreal went to the Stanley Cup final. That series with Toronto, as humiliating as it was for the Toronto Maple Leafs, that series was so close to being over in the favor of the Toronto Maple Leafs multiple times over, and they just couldn't close it out. Some individual awful mistakes by individual players handed the series over to Montreal, right? If Ben Sherratt gets eliminated in the first round of that playoff round by the Toronto Maple Leafs, I don't think anybody cares, right? But because they won that one series and he just continued to like ride that wave and Carey Price was saving everything that moved, it made him look a lot better. Like, to me, I always just go back to, what does a good hockey player look like? Is Ben Sherratt my idea of what a good hockey player looks like? My answer is no. I get why NHL teams might want players like him in the playoffs, right? Look at Toronto. They benched Mr. Timothy Liljegren to get Luke Schenn into the lineup more. And, maybe Liljegren is hurt, but it doesn't sound like he's that hurt considering what the team is saying about him publicly, right? And if I'm Timothy Liljegren, who's been playing extremely well and was also very good in the playoffs last year, I'm kind of upset. Where I'm going, well, you just got this guy, and like he was a depth defenseman on the Vancouver Canucks, like a decent one, but he bounced me from the lineup immediately. Like, I've been playing well. Like, what's the deal? And like maybe, you see Luke Schenn as more of a playoff performer, but I get the feeling if you put a guy who performs really well in the regular season and puts him in the NHL, especially a really mobile, good skating defenseman who can keep the puck away from opponents in the first place, guys like Miro Heiskanen, it come to mind. Yeah, like you're gonna be pretty darn good, and do pretty well. And the guys that already don't play great defensively, that can be exacerbated and made worse in the playoffs. It's a really good question for sure. It's a really good question, but I also do think that there is an inherent bias against smaller defensemen, especially really, really mobile smaller defensemen who may not be super physical, but are really good with their stick, really skilled and really evasive. And it's just coaches are scared off from playing those guys in a playoff scenario. There's just not that many who have even gotten to that point, right? Like, and maybe partially it's for good reason, but in my view, it's something that hasn't truly really been explored, especially on defense, right? Like no one is looking at undersized forwards in the Stanley Cup playoffs and going, but like, they just disappear in the playoffs. That doesn't usually happen. In isolated cases, maybe, but usually the good players remain good in the playoffs and the bad ones remain bad in the playoffs. It's just the bad players in the regular season often are able to get away with more stuff that looks like they're good, but the results are still not good, right? So I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought experiment. But the numbers to me still show the same story as usual. But that's just from me doing some quick research after I was asked this question privately. Okay. Call it a day on that in terms of that question. Random question. How do you feel about Overagers in the draft? Moser for the Coyotes in the second round comes to mind, and he's been playing well. Also a McLaren fan. it's hard sometimes. Yeah, it is kind of hard. I mean, I like Overagers if they're worth drafting. I mean, I had Moser ranked in the early third, late second, I think. I mean, he also was drafted into a situation where the Coyotes, like, of course the Coyotes draft him and immediately put him in the NHL, right? Like, he was already 21 on draft time. He was a perfectly capable puck mover, smooth on his feet, perfectly adequate. But when I looked at Moser, I'm going, well, yeah, the Coyotes drafted him and they don't have anyone to play on the NHL team, so it was an easy call to be like, you want to just like play in the NHL? And like, he's been good enough, right? Like, he's been treading water and eating minutes and doing whatever. Like, I think that there's a reasonable argument for Overagers being guys that you could draft a little bit later on and get good value out of. I think Moser is a bit of an exception based on what I've seen of the reentries for this year. I like Kenta Isegai still, but he's still a guy I want to send to college and say sayonara to for a while. But, I mean, there's not a lot of North American reentry guys I'm interested in that are, like, straight to the NHL. And Giannis Moser was 21, again. And there's not anyone who is that age who is really driving results like he did. Maybe Danil Imurzen, but I would not stuff him in the NHL right away. I think he's just the exception to the rule, and he got drafted into the most optimal situation for a player like Moser to play in the NHL. But he's been good. He's been perfectly fine. Is Matthews' stash plus or negative Riz? I think it's so negative it's positive, which is really in vogue right now. Look, I have a mustache now, but I think it's really in style to do something that is so negative that it then becomes positive. And I feel like the Matthews hairdo and mustache combo is that. Thoughts on Dmitry Kostenko? Hard to get a read on him considering he plays for the hellhole that is Kunlun Red Star. I have not seen him, honestly, this year. I always had really mixed feelings on Kostenko. A lot of upside in terms of the skill, but I haven't really seen him like progressing a tremendous amount. Hey Will, kind of off topic, but do you support a Premier League team? Funny story. Let me have a sip here. Yeah, so Premier League team. First time I ever went across the pond, I went on a business trip with my dad. I think it was one of his first business trips. He went to London, and we went to London together. I was 10, and so we were hanging out in London for, I think it was like 4 or 5 days. It was fun. And we went to a pub. My dad got a beer. I got a Diet Coke or whatever it was that I drank when I was 10 years old and prayed that it was beer, but it wasn't. And the bartender, in a very thick English accent, was asking me if I watched football. And I went, well, not really, but whatever. He's like, well, if you ever decide, he's like, you are obligated to cheer for Chelsea. And if you don't, I'll find you and make you cheer for Chelsea. And I went, that is a strange thing to say to a 10-year-old boy, but okay, sure, fine. And ever since then, I have extraordinarily casually been a Chelsea fan. I don't watch the games. I couldn't tell you who plays on the team, but that bartender is over my shoulder my entire life and threatening me every single day that I should cheer for that team. So when Chelsea does well, I go, oh, that's neat. And when they don't, I go, oh, that's too bad, and then just move on with my life. That's about the extent of fandom I have for those boys. Ryan Leonard thoughts, NHL comparable, pros and cons. I mean, I don't know about an NHL comparable, but an exceptional shooter, really, really good shot. One of the more physically intense players in the draft as well. Just goes and crushes guys as much as he can, and just plays hard physical hockey. Good up and down player. I think his playmaking he's got a lot of room to grow his playmaking ability. Definitely known for more as a shooter these days, but I think he does have some good puck distribution ability. Yeah, like I said, pretty physical. An NHL comparable, I can't really think of one off the top of my head who's like more of an undersized winger that really plays physically and shoots the puck really, really well. Like small Josh Anderson, I guess, but like that's small Josh Anderson, and I don't know if that exists. I'm trying to think of other options. I don't know. I'm sure someone in here will think of a better one. Is there any dark horse players that could go top 5 in the draft? David Reinbacher. I just feel like he plays a style of game where it's like boring but good, and teams probably love that for a defenseman, especially a guy like him, big, plays pro hockey. I'd say it could possibly happen where he goes really, really high. Corson Kuhlman's just signed his ELC. Yes, he did. I know Wisconsin were a collective train wreck this season, but how close do you think he is to NHL readiness? I'd put him in the AHL first. Like, no need to rush guys out of a bad NCAA program and ram him into the NHL, especially when the NHL team isn't great. Put him in the AHL, see how he does, and go from there. Most right-handed people shoot left, and lefties tend to shoot right. I'm right-handed and shoot right, but I feel pretty comfortable shooting left too. Well, look at the fancy ambidextrous boy. Would you rather have Zellweger, Mitchkov, Hines, or Hudson, Gooley, Barron, Mailloux, and Harris? Well, I mean, if I'm dealing with prospects, I'll take the volume of decent players. I don't know. I'd probably go with the Montreal group of Hudson, Gooley, Barron, Mailloux, and Harris, especially because two of those guys are already pretty good NHL defensemen, and I won't look a gift horse in the mouth on that. Canucks fans praying Mitchkov drops to 12 after we go on a 10-game win streak to end the year for them reason to miss the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could do that. Maybe. It would be quite the story. Right-hand dominant Americans tend to shoot righty in hockey more than right-hand dominant Canadians because youth baseball is so big here. That is an interesting thought. I never really thought of that. I did not play baseball growing up, so that checks out. Do you feel like Luneau will become a solid 40-point defender in the NHL? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions about the Anaheim Ducks and the QMJHL guys they drafted. I don't know. I think, like, again, with QMJHL defensemen, if you go and look historically, the number of them that work out in the NHL is very, very small. It's very rare. And when the ones that do, like Sam Girard was like an almost 90-point defenseman in that league at draft eligible time. And even he's like a middle pair guy in the NHL. Like, Mackenzie Weegar was a re-entry in like the 6th round, and he turned into Mackenzie Weegar. Like, it's just very difficult, I think. I don't know. I feel like guys like Warren and Luneau, they'll get plugged into the lineup and be fine. 40 points, I don't know. I feel like for a defenseman to score 40 points, you got to be on the power play, and I don't really think I'd put Tristan Luneau on a power play, personally, especially when you've got guys like Zellweger and Mitchkov in the wings and whoever. Last week I asked about Vladimir Mikhailov. Any thoughts? I really liked him, honestly. He ended up on the ranking list. I had not seen him at all before this season. I think that he's a big reason why a guy like Igor Klimovich is scoring so many points. Just a really smart puck mover, really skilled. He has a drive to get to the net that guys in the MHL just do not have. Like, he plays a really North American style game. I think his skating is, he doesn't move his feet a ton, but he uses his body weight really, really well, creates gaps really well, finds space really, really well, and just moves the puck really smart, really intelligently. And I'm going to be doing more games of him before the NHL draft for sure. But he's in my like late 2nd, early 3rd round range now. Like, I really liked him. And so yeah, that was a good pickup. He's an interesting player. Skill differences in the NCAA conferences and divisions, I mean, they're huge to me. Like, Atlantic hockey versus Big Ten is just such a massive gap. Again, like, you can really just do historical analysis on that stuff. Like, the volume of players that come from certain NCAA conferences or the volume of players that underwhelm from certain conferences is huge, right? Like, Joey Duzak was a 21-year-old who had like 1.5 points a game as a defenseman and was like an okay AHL defenseman. But, like, I think that the Big Ten, for example, is a very, very good conference that breeds a lot of good NHL players because it's a much higher draft or a much higher standard of play. Ryan Conmey thoughts. I don't know who that is. I will write the name down. Following the World Baseball Classic. No, I am not. I am not. I did watch highlights because it was recommended to me because I didn't know China was in the tournament, so that's kind of fun. But no, I'm not following it. Oh my goodness. Okay, we'll close with this. Survivor thoughts. Yes, I am watching this season of Survivor. I am part of a Survivor pool, and I definitely did not have the person voted out last night as my MVP pick for the whole season. The cast this season sounds like, oh my goodness. What would you say to the hordes of Habs fans on Twitter saying Hudson is better than Luke Hughes? Like, let's calm down a little. Like, let's calm down. Lane Hudson's been very, very good this year, but let's calm down. But anyway, yeah, with Survivor, like, I feel like this season's cast is very paranoid. It's a very paranoid group of oversharers. People who are like really like, oh my God, like everything's amazing. Like, oh my God, like I want to be friends with everybody. And like, it's very rare for for some contestants to be like, I am going to play this all very coy. And a lot of the ones that are trying to play coy are like very outwardly trying to play coy. And I don't really know. Like, I don't know. I also think it's a little bit sketchy that people are like practicing the challenges in advance. Like, I think that's kind of embarrassing for the show, where it's like, okay, some contestants are able to like train themselves because the challenges are repeated all of the time. And I think that that's something that they should probably fix, because historically Survivor has created creative challenges all the time that like fit the locale, but unfortunately they've used the same locale for the last like 10 years, and I think it's really sort of limited their creative possibilities, which kind of sucks. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think that Survivor now, again, I started watching it for season 28, I think, and I watched the first season when I was a kid. I think that the way the game has evolved has gone in a direction that makes it almost like a completely different show. Right, practicing the challenges is very common, sure, but like what I'm saying is like the challenges are so repeated that you can practice them, right? Like if you go to the old seasons, a lot of the challenges, it's like impossible to practice, right? Like it's just impossible. Like, you know, you wouldn't be able to, right? Like the puzzles are always different. Some of them include gigantic sets of like mazes and all kinds of stuff that you just can't replicate at home, right? Anyway, I digress. The game has kind of changed over the years, and in more recent years, it's been, you know, originally it was very much like, let's just take people who like Survivor, but come from all different walks of life and just throw them on an island together. Now it seems like they're really like, they have specific archetypes of people, and then they just recruit the right people to sort of fit those buckets, right? And it's just kind of, you know, it doesn't feel like real people are on the show anymore. It feels like a bunch of Instagram influencers are on the show, or like Survivor influencers, which I guess is modern and like very 2020s. But to me, the part of the charm of the original show was like contestants like Courtney in Survivor China being there, where she shows up and she's like, I just applied for the show and I'm a bartender from New York and I do not care about any of this, but like I thought it would be fun. And she was just like a menace the whole season, and it was a lot of fun to watch. You don't see that anymore, right? Because it's like not safe. It's a risky play to like whatever. You know, it's its own sort of version of like analysis paralysis, where it's like they found a mix of personalities that works for them, and they're just trying to like fit things into those personalities, which is fine, but whatever. I do respect a lot that they're very inclusive in the new seasons of Survivor, and like really trying to bring people from all walks of like social backgrounds, and like, you know, their personal preferences, and like their, you know, whatever you want to call it. It's a very diverse group of people from all kinds of different backgrounds and ethnicities and everything, which is great, because I think that for a while Survivor kind of lacked significant movement in that area. And there were some problematic contestants that have been on the show in the past, but now I definitely think you know, it's just different. And I don't know, like I do like that the most recent couple of seasons have been a lot more about the group of people and like building their relationships, rather than like just a bunch of games and twists that really mess with the game. But also at the same time, those are still there, and I'm not sure how I feel about those. But in any case, this season has been an absolute train wreck in a good way, so it's been fun. Finally caught the stream live. That's true. Survivor was ahead of the game in terms of diversity and representation, for sure. But I mean, like, nowadays they're really going out of their way to, like, you know, try to cover all the bases, and bring some, you know, some more, I don't know how to put it, like, some more unseen backgrounds into the spotlight, and really sort of, you know, for example, like Zeke's story, and his archetype, from the couple of seasons that he was on, really, I think, opened a lot of eyes in terms of like what trans people go through a lot of the time. and like what happened at that one tribal council and like what that does to the psyche of a person like that. So anyway, yeah. But yeah, I know what you mean. One question I've been thinking about: roughly how many players around the league would you trade for an average first overall pick for? How many would you trade Bedard for? Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, would I trade like Austin Matthews for Connor Bedard? Probably not, because I already have Austin Matthews. Would I trade like? It's almost like no point in exploring it, because it just wouldn't. No matter what, it's kind of like either way too risky or doesn't really make sense. And the team that's trading the pick to get Bedard probably would rather just take Connor Bedard. I don't know. It's the tough question to answer. Which prospect over the last 3 to 4 years do you think actually should have changed from forward to defense or defense to forward? Someone mentioned Chychrun Mukanov, and I think that's probably the right answer. Probably Chychrun Mukanov. If not him, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't really have a good answer, because it's really hard to diagnose players that are like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. All right, this has got to be the last thing of the night, because I'm also tired and we've been running way over time. I find it strange that the teams in the East with far fewer draft capital than the Canes spent all of their picks at this year's deadline, and yet the Canes only got Ghost and Pool Party. Well, but that's what Carolina does, right? Like, Carolina sees that as a waste of assets, I think. From my understanding and my hunch is that Carolina sees that and goes, we're not going to do that. Like, Carolina always has the long term in mind, right? They don't overspend on free agents. They don't overspend on whatever. They just constantly just add and add and add and hope that over time they just get better and better and better. And look, like, you say the Canes only got Ghost and Pool Party. Like, those are pretty good pickups. Like, Gostisbehere is a pretty good offensive defenseman that Carolina, they don't really have that in their lineup, right? Like, they've got Brent Burns, sure, but like Pesce and Slavin, and I believe Trevor Van Riemsdyk is playing there, I think. Like, they just have a lot of guys who can hold the line. Jalen Chatfield has been playing a sort of more defensive role there, I believe. There's just no, like, this guy's out there to score points from the defense, right? Guy that runs the power play. Yeah, Brady Shea is another one. You mentioned him. Like, Gostisbehere adds that, and they didn't pay anything to get him, right? They didn't pay anything. And with Puljujärvi, like, people who I think are smart have been saying for years, like, who cares that Puljujärvi can't really score when, if you put him in your bottom 6, he's a great defensive forward. Like, yeah, he's not the fourth overall pick we all thought he would be, but like, he's still got some useful stuff. And as a bottom end, TVR's with the Capitals. I forgot he left. But anyway, you get my point. Like, Gostisbehere added something that they didn't really have that you kind of do need. It's just unconventional. And with Puljujärvi, like, I think they just saw it as like, well, we traded basically nothing to get a guy who can play in the bottom 6 and probably be pretty effective, right? Like, and he fits in with the psyche of what the Carolina Hurricanes are all about. Like, of course they went out and got Jesse Puljujärvi, right? To me, I think those were great pickups. And like, that's part of the reason I was tweeting about how I couldn't wait for the Carolina Hurricanes to win the Stanley Cup, because it's like, everybody is just blasting their bank accounts to smithereens, and the Carolina Hurricanes are just, yeah, I'll keep buying more index funds. Give me more index funds. I could use more index funds. I'll just hold on to index funds. Sure, like, give me those. Yeah, just keep. And then, like, they're just kind of doing this every single year, just slowly just adding more and more and more. And they're always just really good in the regular season. And at some point, I think the dam's going to break and they're going to go deep. And of all years, it would be the best if the year they broke through was the year where everybody except them emptied their wallets to buy the hot commodities on the market, and they sat there and went, yeah, we'll take the guys that other people just kind of want to get rid of that we think could be really useful in certain roles. And they did it. I think it's really smart. I don't know. I feel like I'm in the minority on that. I get it. Like, I get the idea of like trading everything to like go for it. But I also think if you look historically, when you do that, it usually doesn't work out, right? 15 of 16 teams don't make it to the Stanley Cup championship, right? 14 of 16, right? They don't make it. And so the odds are against you by default. And like, yes, by going out and getting better players, you might tip those odds a little bit in your favor, but like, what are you giving up, right? Like the whole point with, say, Toronto that I have a problem with is they made trades as if Austin Matthews was 34 years old and this is his last kick at the can. It's like, it's not. And to me, it sounds desperate. It's like they're trying to make people excited, right? Like we were talking about earlier with the Ottawa Senators. They just have Riz. The Toronto Maple Leafs went out and spent money to buy Riz. And sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. And in the NHL, when the playoffs happen, 14 teams don't make it. And oftentimes it's the teams that don't blast their teams to smithereens to go for it or blast their futures to go for it. And with Toronto, it's like they could really have used some picks to supplement guys like Austin Matthews. Like, again, like look at what happened at the beginning of the year when Toronto had some defense injury problems, right? Mark Giordano was on their top pair. They were playing Philip Kral. Like Victor Mete was on their second pair. Like these are guys. And to me, like the fact that you just don't have that young depth to like supplement you, and the Leafs traded young depth, right? They got rid of Rasmus Sandin. Like it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So for a team like Carolina to sort of sit on the sidelines and go, you all have fun. We made our bid for Timo Meier, and the Devils, they liked the Devils package more. That's fine. There aren't, I don't think the Hurricanes have a tremendous amount of prospects that lined up with the type of players that San Jose seems to be interested in. But for San Jose, but for Carolina, yeah, I think they just sat on the sidelines, let everybody beat each other to death, and then just went and picked up the pieces and kind of went, well, we can still do this. Like, this is kind of good. And sure, we've already got a really good team. So, like, let's just go for it and see what happens, right? And we'll still have our picks. We still have our prospects. Let's just keep moving. To me personally, like operating a professional sports organization, and you can write this down in case I'm ever running one, it's about like constant long-term performance, right? It's not about going, okay, now's our chance. So we got to like do everything we can to like take our chance now. Like to me, it's about like a long, steady build towards like year over year improvement, having a group of people there that are there a lot and gel together and just keep getting better with a lot of forgiveness in case things don't go the way you want them to, right? Like that's just a better work environment to me personally. So maybe that sounds like a loser mentality, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to request a lot of those players. So for Carolina, I'm never going to ever question Rod Brind'Amour's ability to ask for stuff out of his players, ever. But I do, but that also doesn't mean that the Carolina Hurricanes have to like go out and mortgage everything to try to move the needle in their favor 5% on the deserve to win-o-meter or whatever you want to call it. Any fun players on the watch list? Okay, yeah, this has got to be it. I got to call it a day after this. I'm starting to lose my voice here. But yes, I mean, there's always fun ones. I mean, Dmitry Vlasenko is fun. Charlie Serrato is fun. Who else? I really like Larry Keenan. He's a lot of fun. Brady Cleveland is a lot of fun for different reasons. Vyacheslav Malov is a re-entry with Nikolai Kvorov, who I also really like. Joey Sylvester is a 5'8" defenseman who I also really have enjoyed watching. And Ruslan Jamaldanov made his SHL debut and got his first point in the SHL today, which is pretty cool, and he's pretty fun. Anyway, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you very much for joining me. This was a lot of fun. Busy night. Ran a little late, but thank you very much. We'll see you next week. Again, there's going to be some changes, which I will go over in the coming weeks. If you are at all considering supporting the show through Patreon, please do not. I don't think you can. I've paused new donations for now because, again, there will be changes coming. I believe I will be doing the same thing on my YouTube membership if I can, but you'll know more by the end of the month. So just throwing that out there. If you really like the show, you could subscribe to the channel, whatever you want to do. Thank you to the sponsors of the show, McKean's Hockey, Fanatics with the QR code. You can use my affiliate code, and Blue Line Hockey IQ program from Marcus Gustafson. You can get 10% off and make yourself more smarter when it comes to hockey with the coupon code Scouching. So thank you very much. We'll see you next week, and stay safe, be well, have fun, but not too much fun, Too much fun ends in tears, and nobody likes crying. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. All right.